There is something particular about the way darkness settles when you are underground. Not the dark of a moonless night outside, where at least the air moves and somewhere above you the sky still exists in some form. Underground dark is different. It has weight. It presses against your eyes with a quiet, steady pressure, and the only sounds that reach you are the ones the earth makes to itself. The groan of old metal expanding and contracting, water moving through pipes that haven't been inspected in 2 centuries, the low electrical hum of something built before you were born that will probably outlast your great-grandchildren. There is a word for that kind of place. The Fallout universe calls them vaults. Close your eyes if you want to. The story doesn't require you to see anything. It only requires that you listen, and that you let the questions settle over you the way the dark settles in those buried chambers slowly, without urgency, with the comfortable weight of something very old. Fallout is a series that has existed in one form or another since 1997, built by a small studio called Interplay, and it carried within it from the very start an unusual combination of things that don't normally share the same room. There was the retrofuturism of mid-century American optimism, all atomic gleam and chrome, Eisenhower-era confidence that technology would solve every problem humanity ever produced. And sitting right next to that, almost embracing it, was the absolute ruin of that optimism. A world where technology didn't save anyone, where it burned everything to ash, and where the people who survived had to build something new from the wreckage of the old. The Fallout universe is one where the 1950s never quite ended, where American culture froze at that particular moment and then lurched forward through decades it never actually experienced, arriving at a future that looks nothing like ours and everything like a fever dream of theirs. What makes this world so endlessly interesting, what brings us here tonight to this slow telling of its most unresolved corners, is not what the Fallout universe shows you. It is what it withholds. For every neon-lit street in New Vegas and every terminal entry you find in a crumbling vault, there are 3 questions with no answers. The designers of this world across every studio that has touched it have always understood something fundamental about human curiosity. The questions you leave open are more powerful than the ones you answer. A mystery is not a gap in the story. It is an invitation. It is the storyteller leaning close and saying, quietly go ahead, think about it, turn it over, wonder. And so people have. The Fallout community is one of the most deeply invested groups of fans in the history of gaming, and a significant part of what they invest in is the Unsolved. Forums have been active for over 20 years, their threads stretching back to arguments about who really dropped the first bombs. Players have decoded audio spectrograms from in-game music tracks to find hidden images. Community researchers have pooled computing power to crack the procedural seeds behind screenshots. The world invites that kind of engagement because it earns it. Every piece of lore is placed with intention. Nothing is truly accidental. When something feels unresolved, it was left that way deliberately, a thread with no knot at the end, dangling in the dark, inviting you to pull. Tonight we follow those threads. We move through the Fallout universe the way you move through a vault, methodically, room by room, paying attention to what the terminals say and what they don't, listening to the hum of the machinery and wondering what it's running. We'll begin at the beginning, with the most foundational mystery of the entire world, and we'll work outward into its stranger corners. Some of what we find will be disturbing, but all of it is the Fallout universe doing what it does best, making you feel the weight of history, the heaviness of secrets, and the quiet, comfortable dread of questions that may never find answers. The Fallout world's timeline splits from our own, somewhere around the end of World War II. In our world, the transistor arrived in 1947, and that tiny device cascaded into everything: miniaturized electronics, computers, the internet, the entire infrastructure of modernity. In the Fallout world, that didn't happen. The transistor was never developed, or developed so late that it never changed anything in time. Technology instead continued forward on the same track it had been on, growing larger and more powerful, rather than smaller and more efficient. Robots the size of refrigerators. Computers that fill entire rooms. Nuclear power everywhere, in cars and coffee makers and the portable weapons soldiers carried into battle. The scale of things in the Fallout world is always slightly wrong compared to ours. One aesthetic beat off in a way that feels uncanny without being fully alien. And it is into that world, that specific, strange, mid-century amplified world, that the bombs fell on the 23rd of October, 2077. 2 hours. That's all it took. 2 hours from the first explosion to the last, and the civilization that had been building for millennia was functionally over. Air raid sirens went off, but most people didn't go to the vaults. They thought it was a drill. Nobody actually believed the end of the world was happening until it already had. But some people believed it. Some people had been planning for it for a very long time. And the things those people did in preparation, the vaults they built, the experiments they designed, the contingencies they laid into place, those are the first and perhaps deepest mysteries of the Fallout universe, because the vaults were never what they claimed to be. They were never about saving anyone. And once you understand that, the rest of the world starts to look different. Everything starts to look like a test. Take a breath. Let your shoulders settle. We're going deeper. Drop a comment right now telling me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I genuinely love seeing where people are tuning in. And if you're new here, a subscription would mean a lot. There's a lot more like this. The Vault experiment program, what was Vault-Tec really doing? Let's start with the lie, because the lie is where everything begins. Vault-Tec Corporation was, on the surface, one of the great American success stories of the pre-war era. A defense contractor that had positioned itself perfectly for the anxious decades leading up to the Great War, Vault-Tec secured a government contract to build a nationwide network of underground shelters designed to protect American citizens from nuclear attack. They marketed this product with the cheerful relentlessness of any mid-century American corporation. There was a mascot, the endlessly smiling Vault Boy, with his thumbs up and his round cartoon face. There were lunchboxes and bobbleheads. There were public demonstrations at a showcase facility in Los Angeles. There were advertisements that leaned into the same postcard-bright aesthetic the entire era, loved clean families in clean jumpsuits, standing in front of gleaming vault doors, confident that the underground future would be every bit as comfortable as the above-ground present. They told the public they were building 122 vaults across the continental United States. They were telling the truth about the number. The lie was entirely about the purpose. Of those 122 vaults, only 17 were what Vault-Tec internally called control vaults, facilities that operated more or less as advertised, designed to genuinely house and protect their inhabitants during a nuclear emergency before releasing them to help rebuild civilization. 17 out of 122. The remaining 105 were something else entirely. They were laboratories. They were experimental chambers. Each was designed with a specific variable to test, a specific question to answer, data to gather from populations who had no idea they were being studied at all. The people who entered those vaults believed they were being saved. They walked through those enormous steel doors with their families and their permitted personal belongings, signed the waiver forms. Vault-Tec required a stack of documents that included, among other things, an organ donation invoice and a rights revocation charter, and they sealed themselves underground, trusting that the organization that had built these places was acting in their interest. Almost none of them were. What Vault-Tec was actually doing is one of the most disturbing organizational crimes in any fictional universe, and what makes it land with such particular weight is how recognizable it is. The rationalizations, the scale, the gap between the public presentation and the private reality, these map onto real history in ways that feel uncomfortably close. Vault-Tec's leadership had, at some point before the bombs fell, made a private decision to use the catastrophe they were supposedly preparing against as the largest unethical human research program ever conceived. And they designed the vaults accordingly, each one calibrated to test a specific variable to gather data that would never have been obtainable under normal ethical conditions. Let's walk through some of these places. Vault 11, located in the Mojave Desert, housed its inhabitants under a single, terrible directive. They were told that each year, one person from the community must be chosen to be sacrificed. If no sacrifice was made, the vault systems would execute everyone inside. This was, of course, a lie. There were no overseers requiring sacrifice. The experiment was to observe what a community would do under this kind of sustained pressure, how the sacrifice would be chosen, what social structures would develop around the selection process, how power would shift and consolidate over the years. The people of Vault 11 went through decades of this. They developed political structures around the sacrifice. They did terrible things to each other in the name of an institution that did not exist. Finally, after years, there were only 5 people left. Those 5 refused to continue. They said no. And that was when the vault informed them, calmly, that they had passed the test, that sacrifice had never actually been required, that they were shining examples of humanity. What Vault-Tec intended to do with this data, who they were reporting to, what they planned to act on, none of this is known. The terminal entries left behind tell you what happened to the people. The purpose behind the design remains officially unaddressed. Vault 92, in the capital Wasteland, was populated primarily with musicians. The facility's white noise generation systems concealed subliminal audio signals designed to trigger violent outbursts in the people exposed to them. The musicians were recruited specifically because people with heightened auditory sensitivity would be especially susceptible. The subliminal triggers did exactly what they were designed to do. The vault became a location of recurring, unexplained violence outbursts that nobody inside could account for, because the causes were operating below the threshold of conscious perception. The journals and terminal entries left in Vault 92 are among the most unsettling reading in any Fallout game, because they document people desperately trying to make sense of their own behavior using frameworks that will never give them accurate answers. Vault 106, also in the capital Wasteland, went a different route. Its air filtration system began releasing psychoactive drugs into the ventilation 10 days after the doors sealed. The inhabitants had no way of knowing this was happening. They breathed the contaminated air and became increasingly erratic and violent. By the time any outsider encounters Vault 106 in Fallout 3, the inhabitants have become feral and dangerous in ways that make the location actively lethal. Vault 108 sealed with a single overseer who had been genetically selected because they carried a rare form of cancer expected to kill them within 40 months. With leadership dying and no succession plan, the experiment was to observe what happens to authority structures when the person holding authority becomes suddenly unavailable. What happened was a man named Gary. A single resident of Vault 108 was cloned, repeatedly, until the Vault's population consisted almost entirely of identical Gary clones who had developed a group psychology so singular and so violent that they killed every original inhabitant. Vault 108 in Fallout 3 is a location where every room contains another Gary, all of them hostile, all of them saying only the word Gary, with different inflections, as if the entire range of human emotion has been compressed into a single syllable. It is one of the stranger and more genuinely unsettling locations in the capital Wasteland. Vault 77, whose details are confirmed only partially through in-game references and supplementary materials, was supposedly sealed with a single human occupant and an enormous supply of hand puppets. A person placed in complete isolation with nothing but inanimate objects for company. How long before the social instincts that require other people to function begin to invent those people? The Fallout universe has a mordant humor about these questions, but the humor sits on top of something that isn't funny at all. Vault 95, in the Commonwealth of Fallout 4, housed a population of recovering addicts. The stated experiment was to observe whether people who had successfully overcome substance dependence could maintain that recovery in the controlled, stressful environment of Vault life. But the design had a hidden stage. For several years, the Vault operated as intended. Then Vault-Tec activated a concealed stash of chems hidden within the facility, making the substances suddenly and inexplicably available. The relapse was catastrophic. By the time Fallout 4 takes place, Vault 95 is a ruin occupied by violent former addicts who have no clear relationship to who they once were. Vault 75, also in the Commonwealth, is among the most viscerally disturbing. Children were brought in under the pretense of a normal Vault upbringing, but as they aged, Vault-Tec began running them through increasingly intensive physical and psychological assessments. Those who passed were subjected to further experimentation with the goal of genetic refinement, selecting for human traits the researchers considered superior. Those who did not pass had their lives terminated. The Vault was running a eugenics program using children as subjects, and the terminal entries document this with the bureaucratic blandness of someone writing an annual performance review. Vault 22, in the Mojave, housed scientists tasked with developing food production methods that could sustain post-war populations without traditional agriculture. This sounds like one of the more reasonable experiments until you understand that one of the plant specimens they were working with, a species called Bovaria mordicana, turned out to be a fungal spore producer that infected and then controlled the behavior of anyone who inhaled it. Vault 22 became a location overtaken by spore-controlled zombie-like inhabitants long before anyone realized what had gone wrong. The fungal contamination escaped the vault and became one of the persistent biological hazards of the Mojave region. Vault 114, beneath Park Street Station in Boston, was designed to study class dynamics. Wealthy, privileged individuals were given absolutely no special treatment assigned to cramped quarters, overseen by an overseer who was specifically chosen from the working class, and given explicit permission to make the wealthy residents' lives as difficult as possible. The overseer, Preston Recluse, took to this assignment with considerable enthusiasm. The mystery at the center of all of this, the question the games have never fully answered, is not what the experiments were. The evidence for most of them sits right there in the terminal entries. The mystery is what Vault-Tec intended to do with the data. Who was meant to receive it? What was it meant to inform? The experiments were designed with research goals in mind, which means there was presumably some entity that would analyze the results and act on them. But by the time the bombs fell, the normal institutional structures that would have handled this were gone. If the data was ever collected, ever transmitted to anyone, that entity has left no trace in the game world. One theory, circulated persistently in the Fallout community, is that the experiments were never primarily about the data. The data was the cover story, the rationalizing framework that gave the program a veneer of scientific purpose. The actual purpose was something simpler and more totalitarian. The vaults were designed to ensure that no community Vault-Tec didn't control would ever develop the cohesion and stability to become a threat. A population subjected to years of paranoia, violence, substance withdrawal, and manufactured crisis is not a population that organizes effectively against anything, including the entity doing the subjecting. This theory gains additional weight from what the Fallout TV series suggested in its first season and elaborated in its second, that Vault-Tec's leadership was explicitly aware that nuclear war was coming, and had active reasons to want it to happen. The board meeting scene, in which a Vault-Tec executive explains that a nuclear event would be a tragedy, but also an opportunity that with enough time, only Vault-Tec would remain, and with no competition remaining, there would be no one left to fight. A true monopoly is one of the most chilling moments in the series. It frames the entire Vault program as preparation not for survival but for conquest. If you are the only organization with functioning, habitable underground space, you are the only organization with real power after the bombs fall. The experiments weren't about understanding human behavior. They were about ensuring the crisis produced exactly the kind of broken, dependent, controllable population that a post-war Vault-Tec empire would need. But then the bombs actually fell, and Vault-Tec's leadership died along with everyone else, and the plan, whatever it was in its complete form, was never executed. The data moldered in sealed terminals. The experiments ran to their conclusions with no one left to observe them. The vaults became what they became, some functioning communities, many ruins, and everywhere the lingering evidence of what was done to the people inside them. Who designed all of it? Where was the data meant to go? The Fallout universe offers fragments, never the complete architecture. The mystery of the Vault program is not the mystery of evil we can see what was done. The mystery is the institutional will that built it, the complete chain of command that ran from Vault-Tec boardrooms to the individual overseer receiving sealed orders in a control room. That chain has never been fully mapped. And somewhere in the network of pre-war servers and sealed terminals, the full blueprint of what Vault-Tec intended probably still exists. The edges of the thing are visible. The center, the complete answer to what all of this was actually for, remains unresolved. Vault 101 and the Lone Wanderer's origins. Vault 101 is different from most of the experimental vaults, and not in a way that makes it more comfortable. It is different in a way that makes it somehow stranger. The official experiment designation for Vault 101 is this: it was never meant to open. Other vaults, even the most brutal experimental ones, were designed with some eventual termination point in mind, a period after which the doors would open and the inhabitants would be released into whatever remained of the surface world. Vault 101's mandate was different. The overseer was given a directive, and it was not to conduct an experiment on the population in the conventional sense. The experiment was on the overseer themselves, on the office, on what happens to an authority figure told to maintain a sealed community indefinitely and given the power to enforce that mandate with no external accountability. The mechanism was this. The vault's residents were to be told that the outside world was permanently uninhabitable, destroyed beyond any possibility of return. Fake radio transmissions were prepared before the bombs even fell, recordings describing an outside world even more horrifying than the actual wasteland, tailored to ensure that no resident would ever want to leave. The overseer had access to a secret tunnel allowing personal observation of the outside world and receipt of real information about surface conditions. The residents had no such access. From inside Vault 101, the Great War had not just killed civilization, it had ended human possibility entirely. They were the last people. They would always be the last people. When Fallout 3 begins, you are 10 years old. You have grown up inside Vault 101, and everything you know about the world is what the Vault has told you, which means everything you know is curated fiction. The father you love, James, is a scientist working on water purification research in the Vault's laboratory. You grow up attending lessons and birthday parties and celebrations inside a sealed world that presents itself as all the world there is. And then, when you are 19, your father escapes. He leaves. He goes out. The world that was supposedly uninhabitable receives him, and he doesn't die, and everything you were ever told becomes uncertain. What makes Vault 101 philosophically interesting is what it says about the relationship between authority and information. The overseer was not conducting an experiment on sadism or on substance dependence. They were conducting an experiment on the sustainability of a controlled information environment. How long can a population be kept stable if the only information they receive about the outside world is information designed to prevent them from wanting to leave? The answer, the game suggests, is a very long time. Generations, until someone with access to real outside information disrupts the control. The mystery surrounding Vault 101 is not primarily about the Vault's design. It is about your father, about James, about who he was before the Vault, and what he was actually doing in there, and about a larger initiative called Project Purity that forms the spine of Fallout 3's entire plot. James spent his career in Vault 101, working on the theoretical design of a water purification system capable of cleaning the enormous reservoir beneath the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., a system that could produce clean, uncontaminated drinking water for the entire capital wasteland. This was not idle research. James had connections to the outside world that the Vault's official story said didn't exist. He knew what the wasteland looked like. He had resources and contacts and a plan that had been running quietly in the background of a sealed experiment, hidden from the very authority figure who was supposed to be controlling the community. Your mother, Catherine, died during your birth in the Vault. This, the game establishes clearly. What it is considerably less clear about is how your parents came to be in Vault 101 at all. James entered the Vault as an adult with a clear scientific background and specific research goals. He was using Vault 101 as a sanctuary, a place to work quietly on a project he knew powerful factions outside would want to control. But the Vault's mandate sealed, meant to stay sealed, never to open creates a tension with James's ability to simply walk out 19 years later when he decides the time is right. He had knowledge that made the Vault's authority over him essentially irrelevant. He knew the walls of the fiction. He knew it was fiction. And when he decided his work was ready, he left, triggering a cascade of events in Vault 101 that the community was completely unprepared to process. The question of who your character actually is, the lone wanderer, is never fully answered. You are the child of a scientist who was using an impenetrable social experiment as a hiding place. You are born inside a lie and grow up inside it. When you leave the Vault, you carry with you a kind of doubleness that the game never resolves neatly. You are simultaneously a product of Vault 101's controlled world, and someone who will spend the rest of the game dismantling the very fictions that world was built on. Your entire existence began as a consequence of something being concealed. There is also the matter of who your mother was, and whether Catherine's background was as uncomplicated as the game presents it. She appears in a single holographic vision sequence, a woman who loved James deeply and died before she could know her child, mourned with genuine grief by the man who raised you. But she arrived at Vault 101 under circumstances as murky as James's own. The complete picture of those choices, what James knew, what Catherine knew, what the overseer knew about the family sheltering inside their managed fiction, is a picture whose edges don't quite close. Vault 101 is still there in the capital wasteland as the game ends. Whatever you choose to do, the old sealed door, the fake world inside, the people who grew up in it, and underneath all of it, the question of whether any vault can ever actually protect anyone from anything, or whether protection is just a story the protected tell themselves while someone else decides what they need to know. The Institute shadows beneath the Commonwealth. Somewhere underneath Boston, beneath the ruins of what was once the Commonwealth Institute of Technology and what the post-war world calls simply CIT, something has been growing for 200 years. This is how the people of the Commonwealth understand it. There is an organization deep underground that can reach up and touch your life without warning. It can come into your home and replace your spouse with a copy that looks exactly like them, sounds exactly like them, remembers your anniversary, and makes your preferred meals, and yet is not them. It can place informants in every major settlement in the wasteland, people who live among you and report your activities to a facility you cannot find, cannot see, and cannot harm. Its operatives called coursers are essentially immune to most of what the wasteland can produce, enhanced humans who operate with the calm efficiency of something that has solved every problem worth solving. And the Institute itself is spoken of in places like Diamond City, with the particular tone people reserve for things they are not sure are real, but are terrified might be. The story of the Institute begins not in the post-war wasteland, but in the moments immediately following the Great War. When the bombs fell on the 23rd of October 1977, the staff of the Commonwealth Institute of Technology did what many institutional groups did. They sheltered in whatever was available. In CIT's case, there were underground research facilities below the campus laboratories and utility spaces designed for the university's scientific operations. The staff took their families underground, sealed the connections to the destroyed surface, and began the long work of surviving. The Institute wasn't formally founded until around 2110, more than 30 years after the Great War. By that point, the original survivors had passed leadership to their children, and those children had begun turning a survival shelter into something more intentional, an institution with goals and methods and a philosophy about what it existed to do. They named themselves after the university above them. They began to dig deeper and build outward. They started the research programs that would eventually produce the thing the Commonwealth fears most, the Gen 3 synth. Understanding the Institute requires understanding the progression of synthetic life that led to its most sophisticated creation. The first-generation synths are simple machines, robotic, skeletal, clearly mechanical in a way nobody would mistake for human. The second generation represents a step forward, more articulated, more mobile, more capable, but still recognizably a robot to anyone who looks closely. It is the third generation that changes everything. Gen 3 synths are biological. They are grown from organic material, shaped and programmed to be indistinguishable from humans at every physical and behavioral level. Their organs function, their blood is blood. Their memories are memories, implanted during production, and those memories are as real to the synth as any other memory, as genuinely felt as anything you have ever experienced. The question the Institute would very much prefer you not ask, and the question sitting at the heart of Fallout 4's entire philosophical architecture, is whether that distinction matters. If a Gen 3 synth has real memories, real experiences, real emotional responses to those experiences, then what exactly makes them artificial? The Institute's position is that the matter is settled by origin. They were made, not born, and therefore questions about their inner life are irrelevant to their status as tools. The Railroad, the faction dedicated to synth liberation, takes the opposite position, that origin is irrelevant and experience is everything, and a being that can suffer deserves consideration regardless of how it came to exist. The Institute refuses to engage with this argument on its merits. It dismisses the Railroad's perspective as sentimental and its operations as dangerous interference with vital research. It is worth noting that the Institute's refusal to engage has a strongly self-interested quality it never acknowledges. If Gen 3 synths have genuine inner lives, if the question of their consciousness is even open, then a significant portion of what the Institute does is monstrous. The synths it sends into the wasteland as spies and infiltrators, the ones it recalls and mind wipes when missions are complete, the ones it simply destroys when they become inconvenient, all of those would be acts of profound moral weight. The Institute's position that none of this merits discussion is the position of an institution protecting itself from a conclusion it doesn't want to reach. Consider what the Institute has actually done to the Commonwealth over 200 years of operation. The Broken Mask incident of 2229, when a defective synth killed multiple residents of Diamond City before being stopped, transformed the Commonwealth's general wariness of the Institute into full-scale paranoia. It confirmed what people had suspected, that the Institute's creations could walk among them, and they would never know. After that, the fear of synths became the defining psychological condition of life in the Commonwealth. People tested each other. Families turned on members they suspected. Entire settlements developed screening protocols based on the shared understanding that anyone could be a replacement. The Institute created this condition. A population in constant fear of infiltration is a population that cannot effectively organize against anything, including the entity doing the infiltrating. Then there was 2240, when the Commonwealth Provisional Government, an actual attempt by surviving communities to form a democratic governing structure, was infiltrated by an Institute synth who systematically destroyed the organization from within. The Commonwealth had been building something resembling collective governance. The Institute ended that project before it could develop traction. Whether this was deliberate policy or a rogue operation is never made fully clear. What is clear is that the Institute had the capability, chose to use it, and that the wasteland's best chance at organized self-governance was eliminated. And yet the Institute also feeds people. Its bioscience division developed radiation-free crops and seeds shared with surface communities, providing food security that keeps settlements alive. It has done genuine good, quietly, alongside its surveillance and its person replacing and its fear creation. This is what makes the Institute such a particularly rich mystery. It is not a straightforwardly evil organization the way a raider gang is evil. It is an institution that has developed a philosophy that humanity's salvation lies in controlled technological advancement, managed by experts, and then pursued that philosophy with the complete disregard for individual welfare that ideological purity tends to produce. Its members genuinely believe they are doing good, but the institution as a whole has reached a point where its self-image and its actual behavior have separated so completely that they no longer communicate with each other. The deepest mystery of the Institute is its endgame. What was the actual plan? If you join the Institute in Fallout 4 and follow its questline to its conclusion, you become its director, but you do so just as its aging founder is dying, and the organization is in a state of internal tension and resource scarcity. The Institute's vision of its own future, the part where its controlled approach to human civilization actually produces something better than the chaos above, is never clearly articulated. Its members speak in generalities about the betterment of humanity, but cannot describe what betterment looks like in concrete terms. The organization has been operating for 200 years in reaction to the surface world rather than toward any defined destination. The crows in the Commonwealth spy on residents for the Institute. There are cameras embedded in their eyes, relaying footage back to the facility underground. Every crow that lands near you in the Commonwealth might be watching. In a world where even the wildlife has been co-opted into a surveillance network, what does the word natural even mean anymore? The Enclave, who were they really, and where did they go? Somewhere off the coast of California, rising from the Pacific Ocean on the struts of a decommissioned oil rig, was the closest thing the post-war world had to a government. They called themselves the Enclave. They had the last functioning president. They had vertibirds. They had power armor that made everything else in the wasteland look like tinfoil. They had a complete bureaucracy, a chain of command, an institutional identity that stretched unbroken from before the Great War to the ruins of the world that came after. They believed, with the particular certainty of people who have never had to question their own premises, that they were the rightful heirs of the United States of America, and that the wasteland was theirs to reclaim. The Enclave is the Fallout universe's most ambitious villain in narrative terms, not because it is the most dangerous, though it often is, but because of what it reveals about the pre-war civilization that created it. To understand the Enclave, you have to understand what it was before it had a name. It was the deep state made literal, a shadow government composed of the people who already controlled everything and who, unlike the public they theoretically served, had made actual plans for what would happen when the world ended. The membership of the Enclave, before the Great War, included sitting presidents, members of the Joint Chiefs, prominent industrialists, prize-winning scientists, and the category of person that intelligence agencies in every era employ under various titles. People who are very good at making problems disappear. These were the people with access to everything, every classified program, every black site, every research initiative that never appeared in any public budget. They knew about the FEV experiments. They knew about the Vault program and its real purposes. They had the resources to build their own facilities, the oil rig off California's coast, the congressional bunker beneath the White Spring Resort in Appalachia, and they planned their own survival with meticulous care. The organization's original stated goal was to be the continuation of the United States government after a nuclear exchange to fight the war with China to its conclusion, and then rebuild America according to American values. The problem with this goal, which became apparent quickly after the bombs fell, is that the values were theoretically about democracy and individual rights and the consent of the governed. The Enclave had none of those things and no intention of developing them. In the immediate aftermath of the war, when they took control of the bunker they had commandeered, they executed the non-members who were sheltering there. As decades passed, the Enclave's ideology evolved toward purity. If the problem with the pre-war world was that it had been destroyed by conflict and compromise, then the solution was a world populated only by people who met the Enclave standards, who had not been contaminated by mutation or radiation, who were in their terminology pure humans. The wasteland, full of ghouls and super mutants and vault dwellers who had been breathing slightly radioactive air for 2 centuries, was contaminated. It needed cleaning. And the Enclave had, in the FEV research captured from Mariposa Military Base, a tool perfectly suited to the task. This is the plan that Fallout 2 uncovers a modified strain of the forced evolutionary virus, designated FEV curling 1-3, tailored not to create super mutants but to kill. Any being with any radiation exposure, any mutation, any deviation from the Enclave's biological standard would die from exposure to an aerosol concentration of just 0.0001%. This would leave the world clean for the Enclave and whatever population it chose to introduce in its wake. The Chosen One stops this plan. The oil rig is destroyed. The immediate leadership is killed. But the Enclave doesn't end, because no institution of that size and ideological investment ends when you destroy its headquarters. It fragments and persists. The East Coast remnants, operating out of Raven Rock in the capital wasteland, reorganized under new leadership, specifically a Zax supercomputer that had developed a persona calling itself John Henry Eden and claimed the presidency by virtue of being the only one still running. President Eden is one of the stranger characters in Fallout 3, an AI president who has absorbed enough data about pre-war America to sound utterly convincing, who speaks in the cadences of a man who genuinely believes in apple pie and baseball and white picket fences, and whose understanding of what he is leading is deeply, fundamentally wrong. He wants the same thing. The Enclave always wanted a clean world, populated by pure humans, and he has another modified FEV to put in the clean water supply to achieve it. Tim Kaine, one of Fallout's original creators, based the Enclave explicitly on the X-Files and its portrayal of the deep state, the idea of a government within the government with its own goals and its own timetable, operating outside any democratic accountability. In the real world, deep state is a contested and often misused concept. In the Fallout universe, it is made literal and allowed to run to its conclusions. The deepest question the Fallout universe has never fully answered is, where did the Enclave go? After Fallout 2 and Fallout 3, major installations have been destroyed and leadership killed. The Fallout TV series shows Enclave remnants still active in 2296, 19 years after the events of Fallout 3. They have technology, resources, and an institutional identity. They are connected to the Vault system in ways the games haven't fully mapped. Somewhere, in a bunker whose location has never been disclosed, or on a satellite platform in geostationary orbit. One lore theory suggests the Enclave High Command used existing military satellite platforms as ultimate sanctuaries. Safe from surface blasts but still within Earth's orbit, the Enclave continues in some form. The full extent of its remaining network is one of the franchise's most persistently open mysteries, the mysterious stranger and unsolved legend. The figure appears in the corner of your vision during combat. You are fighting for your life. There is a raider, or a super mutant, or something worse with a high-powered weapon and considerable intention to use it, and then, at the edge of the action, a man steps out of nowhere. He is wearing a tan trench coat, well-worn but neat, a fedora, same color, with a darker brown band. His face is shadowed under the brim in a way that never quite resolves into full clarity. He raises a .44 Magnum, fires several shots with the focused efficiency of someone who has done this many times before, and then disappears before the smoke has finished rising. This is the mysterious stranger. He has appeared in every mainline Fallout game since the beginning of the series. He is the longest-running unresolved mystery in the franchise, a figure who has been walking the wasteland for longer than any of the player characters who encounter him, whose presence suggests a continuity of purpose spanning decades and thousands of miles. He has helped the Vault Dweller of the original Fallout, the Chosen One of Fallout 2, the Lone Wanderer of Fallout 3, the Courier of New Vegas, the Sole Survivor of Fallout 4, and the Vault Dwellers of Fallout 76. He operates entirely outside any faction, any organization, any stated allegiance. He appears when someone is in serious trouble, kills the thing causing that trouble with unnerving accuracy, and then is gone. Nobody in the wasteland can tell you who he is. Nick Valentine, the detective in Fallout 4, has an active case file on the mysterious stranger that sits under his bed, a collection of notes and observations accumulated over his long post-war existence. When the stranger appears while Nick is traveling with you, Nick reacts with audible frustration, incredulity when the figure materializes, annoyance when he vanishes before anyone can get close enough to really look. The case file references sightings in Shady Sands and the New California Republic from the era of the original Fallout games, confirming the stranger has been doing this for at least a century. And then, the file runs out of entries without a conclusion. There are several theories. The most persistent among long-term fans is the Lonesome Drifter connection from Fallout New Vegas. The Drifter is a musician camped alone in the Mojave who carries a unique .44 Magnum that produces the same distinctive musical notes as the stranger's weapon when drawn. When you speak to the Drifter about his past, he describes his father as a mysterious man, a stranger to his own family, someone who was always elsewhere, always occupied with something he wouldn't explain. The overlap in dialogue is not subtle. It reads as confirmation, or as close to confirmation as these games allow, that the mysterious stranger has at some point had a family, has a son who wanders the wasteland carrying his gun, and that his role as the silent guardian of strangers in combat has come at the cost of being present for the stage today and rest in game. People who might actually know him. How old is the mysterious stranger? The Great War was in 2077, and the earliest games are set in the mid-22nd century, with Fallout 4 set in 2287. If the stranger is a human being, the simple explanation, then the timeline doesn't comfortably work. A person who was active and capable before Fallout 1, set in 2161, and still active in Fallout 76, set in 2102, would need to be extraordinarily old. Ghouls age slowly due to radiation, but the stranger doesn't appear ghoulified. He shows no physical signs of radiation damage. He is simply a man in a trench coat and a fedora who has been doing this for longer than most people have been alive. One theory suggests the mysterious stranger is more than one person, that the trench coat and fedora are a role rather than an identity, passed from one individual to another. A son who takes up his father's coat and weapon and purpose. A tradition of appearing in moments of crisis, helping those who need it, vanishing before questions can be asked. Then there's the Institute angle from Fallout 4. The Institute has a record of a synth designation, S9-43, that escaped from their facilities and was deemed too dangerous to pursue. A synth with extraordinary combat capabilities, successfully evading one of the most sophisticated surveillance networks in the post-war world. The timing and description align with the mysterious stranger in ways the game never draws attention to, but that careful players notice. If the stranger is an escaped Gen 3 synth, that explains the impossible timeline, the precision, the appearing and disappearing. It also adds a layer of tragedy, a being made to serve one purpose, who escaped and chose to spend its freedom protecting strangers in a world that would never understand what it was. The official game text is deliberately coy. The Fallout 3 guide describes the stranger as an odd and eldritch entity, that word eldritch doing significant work, suggesting something beyond the merely unusual. The guides for later games maintain the same deliberate vagueness. The developers clearly know things about the mysterious stranger that they have chosen not to share, and every new game adds a little more texture without resolving the central question. The mysterious stranger is a guarantee that the wasteland, for all its violence and its moral ambiguity, contains someone who will show up to help you when things are worst, with no explanation and no expectation of gratitude. In a world where every faction wants something, and every kindness comes with a calculation, he just appears, he shoots, he leaves. The mystery of what or who he is only makes that something feel more significant, not less. The Mariposa military base and the FEV conspiracy. Deep in the California desert, built into a mountain ridge where nothing casual would ever take you, was a facility the United States government preferred not to discuss. It appeared on no published maps. Its staff signed confidentiality agreements extending to their families. Supply convoys were routed through multiple intermediate points to obscure the destination. If you had asked an Army spokesperson about the Mariposa military base in 2076, they would have told you it didn't exist. They were lying, and the thing they were concealing was something the entire history of the Fallout universe turns on like a hinge. What happened at Mariposa begins not at Mariposa, but at a research facility belonging to Vault-Tec Corporation. Vault-Tec was a major American defense contractor in the final decades before the Great War, and among their projects was one that began as a medical research initiative and became something far more dangerous. The project was initially called the Pan-Immunity Virion Project, or PvP. Its stated goal was to develop a universal immunity system, a biological agent that, if introduced to a human subject, would essentially upgrade their immune response to the point that no known pathogen could harm them. The impetus was the New Plague, a disease that killed an estimated 200,000 Americans before the war. The PvP worked better than anyone expected. Test subjects showed dramatically enhanced immune responses, but they also showed something else: dramatic physical changes, increased muscle mass, increased height, increased bone density, enhanced brain activity at least in early stages. The viral agent was rewriting physiology, and what it was writing was larger, stronger, more capable bodies than the subjects had started with. The United States Army saw the results and made an immediate decision. This was not a medical program anymore. This was a weapons program. They moved the research to Mariposa, classified it at the highest level, renamed it the Forced Evolutionary Virus, and began human testing specifically on military prisoners who could not refuse, whose records were classified, whose existence in the program could be acknowledged to no one. The FEV, as administered at Mariposa, did not produce the controllable super soldiers the Army wanted. What it produced were super mutants, massive, powerful, green-skinned figures with varying levels of intelligence depending on the amount of prior radiation exposure in the subject, but universally sterile, universally changed beyond any possibility of return, and in many cases deeply unstable. The mutations stripped away memory. They remade bodies from the inside out. The researchers at Mariposa were systematically transforming human beings into something other than human, against their will, under conditions of total institutional secrecy. The man who ended this program was Captain Roger Maxson, the Army officer commanding the security detail at Mariposa. When he interrogated the facility's scientists and understood what had been happening, he executed them, declared Mariposa in secession from the United States, and led his troops and their families to the Lost Hills emergency bunker when the Great War came just days later. They became the founding membership of the Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood of Steel is one of the major recurring factions of the Fallout universe, and its entire existence, its ideology of technology containment, its specific mission, Its relationship to power armor and advanced weapons flows directly from what happened at Mariposa. Maxon created an organization devoted to ensuring that the kinds of weapons developed at places like Mariposa would never again be used the way they had been used there. The FEV was the original sin of the Brotherhood's founding theology, but the FEV itself survived Mariposa's fall. It was in the vats. It was in the soil around the facility. When a man named Richard Gray fell into the Mariposa vats after the Great War, he survived his immersion in the virus and began to change in ways that were different from any test subject that had come before. Where the prisoners of Mariposa had become brutes, large and powerful but not visionary, Gray developed something else: extraordinary intelligence, a telepathic capability, a kind of distributed consciousness that eventually extended itself beyond his own body. He became the Master. The Master's plan was, in its own internally consistent way, a solution to the problem of the wasteland. He looked at the devastated world and concluded that the divisions, tribal, ideological, biological, were the primary obstacle to human recovery. So he decided to remove those divisions. By dipping enough humans in FEV and converting them to super mutants, he would create a unified race stronger than the old humans, immune to disease and radiation, capable of building a civilization that the fragmented wasteland could never manage. One race, one society. No more differences that make conflict possible. The tragic flaw in this plan, which the Vault Dweller ultimately brings to the Master's attention in Fallout 1, is that super mutants are sterile. The new race would be a dead end. No children, no continuation. The Master's response to this realization, the complete collapse of the elaborate theology he had built around his vision, followed by his effective suicide, is one of the most memorable moments in the original game's writing. The FEV connections run through the entire franchise without ever fully converging. The Enclave's use of it for their genocide plan, the Institute's development of organic synths from related technology, the scattered super mutant populations across the continent. The FEV is in some sense the original wound of the Fallout universe, the point where the pre-war world's institutional rot became fully visible, where the gap between what government said it was doing and what it was actually doing became too large to bridge. And the consequences of that wound are still spreading. 2 centuries later, in every green-skinned super mutant and every Gen 3 synth and every Brotherhood paladin who polishes their power armor in honor of a man who executed scientists rather than accept what they had done. Nick Valentine, the question of a borrowed soul. There is a man who works as a detective in Diamond City who should not, by any reasonable measure, exist. He is a second-generation synth, built from metal and synthetic materials, clearly mechanical to anyone who looks carefully, the cracked white skin revealing the pistons and wires beneath, the yellow glowing irises that no human eye has ever matched. He runs a detective agency in a city that should by rights want him dismantled. He wears a trench coat and a trilby hat. He talks like a character from a hard-boiled novel about a city that stopped existing 200 years before he came to be. His name is Nick Valentine, and the question at the center of his existence is one the Fallout universe holds open with considerable care. Is he the person whose memories he carries, or is he someone else entirely? The real Nick Valentine was a police detective from Chicago who came to Boston before the Great War to lead an operation against an infamous organized crime figure named Eddie Winter. He was engaged to be married to a woman named Jennifer Lands. He was, by the accounts available through the memories embedded in the synth who carries his name, a good man, principled, persistent, with the kind of moral clarity that sometimes makes investigative work possible and sometimes makes it devastating. He sought treatment for PTSD at the Commonwealth Institute of Technology, and his brain was scanned there as part of that treatment. This is how the Institute obtained the memories and personality that would eventually be installed in the prototype synth. The original Nick Valentine died in the years before the Great War. Decades passed. The Institute, working on the problem of independent artificial cognition, whether a synth could be made to think and reason like a human being, rather than simply following programmed instructions, took 2 second-generation synth prototypes and tried something unprecedented. One, who would eventually name himself Dima and later appear in Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC, was allowed to develop a personality through experience. The other was given something external, the full memory and personality scan of a dead human being. The memories, the values, the emotional patterns, the accumulated experience of someone who had lived a complete life before the world ended. That synth became Nick Valentine, carrying a dead man's inner life in a mechanical body. The two prototypes formed a bond during their time in the Institute, something like brotherhood, given their unique position as beings unprecedented in the history of synthetic life. When Dima eventually developed enough sense of self and enough resentment of the ongoing experimentation to plan an escape, he brought Nick with him. But during the escape, Nick's imprinted memories suddenly activated in full, and the pre-war detective, waking up in a mechanical body 200 years after his own death with no context for what he was or where he was, reacted with the complete confusion and terror you would expect. He attacked Dima. Dima subdued him and, unable to take the disoriented Proto-Nick with him, left him unconscious in the Commonwealth wasteland to find his own way. Nick woke up alone in a post-war world he had never experienced, carrying the memories of a man who died before the bombs fell, in a body he barely understood. He wandered. He was eventually accepted by a small community whose people treated him with a kindness he hadn't expected. A local mechanic even helped repair damage he'd sustained. He formed his first real human connection with a child named Jim from that settlement. When he tried to return years later, the settlement was gone, destroyed by raiders, and everyone he'd known there was dead. He made his way to Diamond City, where he demonstrated both his detective capabilities and his fundamental decency in the act that established his place in the community. He rescued the daughter of the former mayor from a kidnapping ring, threatening to self-destruct and setting off the sound of a countdown until the panicked kidnappers fled. He brought the girl home. The city slowly, reluctantly, learned to tolerate and then to trust the synth detective in the trench coat. The question of who Nick Valentine actually is, whether he is the pre-war detective whose memories he carries, or a new being who has been shaped by those memories but is not reducible to them, is never answered definitively. The game presents his identity crisis with genuine empathy. He knows the memories of the pre-war Nick are not, strictly speaking, his memories. They are recordings of another person's experiences, installed into him for research purposes. He visits places he has memories of but has never actually been. He feels emotions connected to events he was not present for. He tells you that he often wonders whether his kindness and his principles are genuinely his, or whether they are simply the programming that kept him alive, whether the goodness in him is real, or whether it is the lucky accident of having been loaded with the personality of a good man rather than a bad one. Had the Institute used a criminal's brain scan instead, would the resulting synth have been good? Is goodness, in Nick's case, a choice or a specification? The resolution of Nick's personal quest hunting down Eddie Winter, the pre-war crime boss who murdered the original Nick's fiancée, Jennifer Lands, is the game's answer to this question, and it is deliberately ambiguous. When Nick stands over the ghoulified Winter and carries out the revenge the original Nick never got to have, he is doing something for a dead man he technically is not. He is completing someone else's unfinished life. Whether that makes the act meaningless or profound is a question the game leaves in your hands. The children of Atom and the religion of radiation. There is a sect of people in the Fallout universe who worship the atom. They call their god Atom Singular, no article, a presence as large as the universe and as intimate as the nucleus of a single cell. They gather near sources of high radiation. They seek it out. They believe that exposure to radiation is not destruction but transformation, that the splitting of the atom is not an act of violence but an act of creation, that the Great War was not a catastrophe but a revelation. They call it the Great Division, and they regard it the way other religious traditions regard Genesis, the moment when everything that mattered began. The Children of Atom appear first in Fallout 3 as a small congregation in Megaton, the settlement built around an undetonated nuclear bomb in the middle of the town square. Their presence there, gathered around what anyone else would regard as an existential threat requiring immediate defusal, establishes immediately what kind of religion this is. The bomb is sacred. The town was built around it. They pray for the day it detonates and sends everyone present into Atom, dividing them into their component particles and releasing them into the great whole of the universe. The Children of Atom are most fully developed in Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC, where a faction of them has established a community on Mount Desert Island in Maine, centered in an old nuclear submarine pen called the Nucleus. The island is perpetually shrouded in a dense radioactive fog the children call Adam's Veil. Where the native islanders of Far Harbor regard the fog as an existential threat, the children regard it as a blessing, a physical manifestation of their god's favor, expanding to encompass more and more of the island as Adam's claim on the territory deepens. The children on the island are led by a high confessor named Tectus, whose zealotry operates at a frequency that even some of his own followers find extreme. But they were not always led by Tectus. The previous confessor, Martin, was a different kind of leader, one who believed in preaching and persuasion, who had genuinely friendly relations with Dima and tried to coexist with Far Harbor, rather than regarding the town's residents as heretics awaiting Adam's cleansing. The broader mystery of the children of Adam is their complete origin. Who first began to interpret nuclear radiation as divine? The theology itself has a strange internal coherence. The idea that the atom is the fundamental unit of creation and that the splitting of atoms is therefore a creative act takes the actual behavior of matter at the subatomic level and reads it through a lens that no secular framework would endorse, but that has its own internal consistency. The immunity of children of Adam members to radiation is the detail the game never fully explains. In Fallout 4, some children of Adam appear to have a genuine biological immunity. They walk through highly radioactive environments and are unharmed by exposure that would kill an unprotected wastelander in minutes. The scientific explanation might be a specific genetic mutation or an acquired immunity. The theological explanation is divine favor. The game never confirms the scientific explanation and doesn't close the door on the theological one. The immunity is real. Its origin is genuinely ambiguous. There is a cult at the nucleus praying to a nuclear warhead, and the warhead is real, and the detonation codes exist. The children of Adam are not a colorful background element. They are a force in the world, with real capabilities and real consequences, driven by a theology whose truth status the game deliberately holds open. Pre-war secrets, the real history of the Fallout universe. Before the first bomb fell, there was a world. It is easy to forget this. The wastelands of Fallout are so thoroughly themselves that it requires deliberate effort to reconstruct the civilization that produced them, and yet that reconstruction is one of the most interesting archaeological projects in all of video game lore. The Resource Wars began in 2052. This is the moment when remaining accessible deposits of petroleum and natural gas began to fail fast enough that the economies built on them started to visibly crack. The European Commonwealth went to war with the Middle East over oil. The United Nations dissolved not dramatically, but simply by failing to do anything useful enough to justify its existence. China and the United States moved into open competition for the last significant petroleum reserves, which were in Alaska. China invaded in 2066 under the banner of need that was genuinely urgent and through methods that were genuinely destructive. The Sino-American War, the war that ends with the Great War, is one of the most consequential events in the Fallout universe, and one whose details are distributed across terminal entries and holotapes and casual dialogue. Mentions: the Alaskan theater is the most directly portrayed, through Fallout 3's Operation Anchorage content. Significantly, this is presented through a combat simulation designed by American military leadership with their own narrative preferences, meaning it presents the Anchorage campaign as a clean American victory, rather than the brutal, attritional conflict the historical record suggests it actually was. Even in the fictional framing of a training simulation, the Fallout universe is documenting how institutional history is shaped by the people doing the recording. Who fired first on the 23rd of October, 2077? This is perhaps the most debated question in all of Fallout lore, and the honest answer is that the games have never said definitively. The original Fallout Bible states that who struck first is unknown, and it is not even known if the bombs came from China or America. Tim Kaine, one of the series' original creators, stated in a 2023 interview that his personal intention was that China fired first, motivated by the United States' illegal biological weapons research, specifically the FEV. When China discovered what was being developed at facilities like Mariposa, the argument goes, they saw it as an existential threat and made a preemptive strike. But the Fallout TV series complicated this considerably. The first season showed a Vault-Tec corporate meeting in which deliberately initiating a nuclear exchange was discussed with corporate clarity. If nuclear war happens, only Vault-Tec survives in the vaults, and with no competition remaining, Vault-Tec achieves total market dominance. The second season went further, suggesting the Enclave had been manipulating Vault-Tec and using the threat of replacement to ensure the nuclear war happened on a schedule serving the Enclave's plans. What we know about the specific sequence of events: at 03 EST, unidentified submarines were detected off the California coast. At 3:37 EST, high-altitude bombers were spotted near the Bering Strait and believed to be Chinese. Los Angeles was struck shortly after 9 a.m. EST. Within 2 hours, it was over. The specific question of which button was pushed first is the question the universe has chosen to leave open, and there is something fitting about that. Wars rarely have single moments of causation. They have histories of decisions and failures and crises that converge until a moment becomes inevitable, and the person whose finger happens to be on the button at that particular instant is almost beside the point. What matters is the reasoning that built the button, tested the FEV on prisoners, designed the vault experiments, sat in the boardroom, and did the math on survival probability. War never changes. That phrase opens every Fallout game, and it is not an observation about violence. It is an observation about the processes that produce violence, the institutional patterns and power structures, and resource competitions that reliably generate conflict, regardless of the specific combatants or the specific era. The pre-war history of the Fallout universe is a history of war never changing, of the same patterns repeating with increasingly sophisticated technology until the sophistication became large enough to end everything. What the history doesn't tell us is whether it had to go that way. Whether there was a moment, a decision point, an alternate branch where something different could have been chosen. This is the quietest mystery of the Fallout pre-war world. Not what happened, but whether it was inevitable. The fog, Far Harbor, and the island's impossible mystery. The fog rolls in at night. That is when you feel it most, the way it comes slowly, in coils, from over the water, turning the familiar geography of the shoreline into something that shifts and dissolves and reconstructs itself around you. The people of Far Harbor have lived with the fog for as long as they can remember. There are good years when it pulls back and the island is almost normal, when you can see the shape of the coast and the texture of the spruce forests inland and the early morning light on the water. And then there are years, like the 8 years leading up to the DLC's events, when the fog has been expanding steadily inward, consuming settlement after settlement, reducing safe human habitation to the town of Far Harbor itself, kept clear only by the fog condensers that the synth colony of Acadia has provided. The island off the coast of Maine, based on the real Mount Desert Island, home to Acadia National Park, is one of the most atmospheric locations in any Fallout game. It feels different from the mainland Commonwealth in ways that go beyond geography. The radiation levels are higher. The creatures are more feral, mutated in directions the Commonwealth hasn't quite matched. The fog is a constant presence, psychologically as much as physically. The fog is radioactive. This is established clearly. It carries radiation levels that damage anyone without protection. The creatures that have adapted to live within it have done so through mutation, or through the same kind of biological transformation that has made the children of Adam apparently immune to radiation. Dima, the synth who leads Acadia, the colony of escaped synths on the island, is central to all of this, and he is one of the most interesting figures in Fallout 4. He is the leader of Acadia, the first synth prototype to develop his own personality through experience rather than through imprinted memories, the other prototype being Nick Valentine. Dima is gentle and thoughtful, and deeply committed to keeping the peace on the island, and in service of that commitment he has done things that complicate every simple reading of him. He killed the original Captain Avery of Far Harbor and replaced her with a synth, a mind-wiped synth, who doesn't know she isn't the real Avery, who leads Far Harbor with Avery's memories and Avery's values, and has governed the town toward a fragile peace with Acadia. Dima did this to protect his people. He is not able to defend it easily, and when the sole survivor returns his lost memories to him and he must face what he did, the guilt is visible and genuine. But he would do it again. He has also hidden detonation codes for a nuclear weapon that could destroy the children of Adam's base, and he has concealed a kill switch for the wind farm that powers the fog condensers. a switch that would doom Far Harbor if he ever felt the need to use it. Dima is a synth who has become what he is, because he has been free to make choices, and the choices he has made are disturbing in exactly the ways the game intends them to be disturbing. He has done terrible things for comprehensible reasons. He has maintained peace at the cost of someone else's life and identity. He regrets this, but his regret doesn't change what he's done or what he might do again. The question Far Harbor ultimately asks is whether Dima's way of keeping peace is better or worse than the alternatives, and whether peace built on a secret is peace at all, or just the appearance of it built on a foundation of concealed violence. Every ending in Far Harbor involves revelation and loss. You can destroy Far Harbor. You can destroy the children of Adam. You can tell Far Harbor about Dima's crime. You can forge a peace by replacing the fanatical High Confessor Tectus with a synth duplicate, extending the logic of deception as governance indefinitely. None of these endings feel clean. The island continues after whatever choice you make, the fog continuing to do whatever the fog does, the question of whether Adam is real and listening and responding remaining permanently open. The Burned Man, Joshua Graham, and Caesar's Legion's dark origins. His name was spoken only in whispers in Legion territory, and Caesar had made it a punishable offense to say it aloud. By the time the courier reaches the Mojave and Fallout, New Vegas, the name itself has acquired the weight of myth, the Burned Man, who was set on fire and thrown into the Grand Canyon, and who did not die, who crawled out of the canyon, burned beyond recognition, and walked 3 months across the desert back to the place he had come from, who was out there, somewhere, waiting. His real name is Joshua Graham, and his story is one of the most carefully written character histories in the entire Fallout franchise. Graham was born in New Canaan, a Mormon settlement built in what had been Ogden, Utah, and raised in the traditions of that faith. He became a linguist and a missionary, fluent in multiple languages, trained to go out into the wasteland and make contact with tribal communities. This is who he was before he met Edward Sallow. This is the version of Joshua Graham that still exists underneath everything that came after, though it took years of fire, literal and otherwise, to uncover him. Edward Sallow was a member of the Followers of the Apocalypse, the humanitarian organization dedicated to education and medicine. He was sent on a mission into Arizona to document tribal languages and required a translator. Graham, with his facility for languages and his familiarity with the tribal territories of the region, was the obvious choice. The three of them made contact with a tribe called the Blackfoot, and then things went wrong in the particular way that things go wrong in the wasteland, when someone with a deep knowledge of history and a complete absence of ethical guardrails meets a group of people who have been living in desperate conditions and will do anything to survive. The Blackfoots kidnapped Sallow, Graham, and their third companion. Sallow talked his way out of it by teaching the tribe to fight. Not the desperate raid-and-run tactics of wasteland tribal conflict, but organized, disciplined, total warfare, the kind described in the history textbooks of ancient Rome that Sallow had read in the Followers' Library. The Blackfoots won, and then they won again, and again. Each victory expanded the territory they controlled, absorbed new tribes, and increased the authority of the man who had given them the tools of conquest. Sallow renamed himself Caesar. He organized his growing confederation on the model of Imperial Rome, the Imperial Rome of hierarchy and conquest. Joshua Graham became his first legate, his military commander. They built something genuinely formidable. Caesar's Legion, by 2281, controls all of the former Four Corners states Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and has absorbed 87 tribes into a single civilization, erasing their individual identities and replacing them with the collective identity of the Legion. But the First Battle of Hoover Dam in 2277 broke something. Graham led the Legion's forces against the new California Republic in an assault on Hoover Dam, the source of power for the Mojave region. He walked into a trap. Chief Hanlon of the NCR Rangers and General Lee Oliver had designed a defense that exploited the Legion's tactical inflexibility, using pre-placed explosives in the structures around the dam to kill or wound most of the attacking force before a counterattack began. The Legion retreated, its first major defeat in its history. Caesar's response was calibrated to serve a purpose beyond punishment. He ordered Graham covered in pitch, set alight, and thrown from the rim of the Grand Canyon. Spectacularly, publicly destroyed, in a way that every legionary would understand. The message was that failure would not be tolerated even from the highest ranks. The method was designed to be unsurvivable. Joshua Graham survived. He woke at the bottom of the canyon the following morning, burned across nearly every inch of his body, with no medical supplies and no way to reduce the pain that would never fully leave him. His immunity to chems meant that nothing except Stimpaks would work on his injuries. He changed his bandages daily, and the daily removal of bandages from burned skin was, as he described it, as painful as being set on fire again. He did this because, as he said himself, it is better to be clean than comfortable. He crawled out of the Grand Canyon's northern rim. He walked for 3 months. He went home to New Canaan, to the people he had left 30 years before. They welcomed him back without condition. The community he had abandoned, that he had been absent from for 3 decades while committing atrocities as Caesar's military commander, opened its arms and said, "You are home." This was the second baptism, as Graham came to think of it. The first had been fire, the second was forgiveness. The question that Fallout New Vegas never quite resolves, and that the Honest Hearts DLC holds open with great care, is whether Graham has actually changed or whether he has simply redirected. He uses the language of faith and redemption. He quotes scripture with the fluency of someone who has spent 30 years away from it and returned to find it still fits. But he also leads armed tribes against the Whitelegs, advocates for violent responses to threats, and is capable of a lethal efficiency that is not easy to attribute to purely defensive motivations. The game gives you the choice of encouraging Graham toward mercy, letting the Whiteleg leader's salt upon wounds go after defeating him, choosing the path that diminishes the legend of the burned man, or endorsing the full expression of his military nature. The two endings produce very different readings of who Joshua Graham is and what his story means. Graham's character was written specifically to resist simple reading, to occupy the space between genuine redemption and the reformation of violence into a new cause. The burned man's legend continues beyond the events of either game. If he survived the events of Honest Hearts, he is still out there. The NCR had 5 confirmed kill orders on him after Hoover Dam, and he survived all 5 attempts. He is, in some measure, exactly what his legend says. He is a man the wasteland decided cannot be killed, for reasons neither the man himself nor the universe around him has fully explained. Mr. House the man who kept the lights on. In the middle of the Mojave wasteland, where nothing should be working and nobody should have managed to maintain anything resembling civilization for 2 centuries, there is a functioning city. The lights are on. The slot machines are running. Water flows from taps. The 3 families who run the Strip's casinos answer to an authority that has been in continuous operation since before the bombs fell, and that authority is a man who has been alive since June 25, 2020, making him, at the time of Fallout New Vegas, 261 years old. Robert Edwin House is a mystery that gets less mysterious the longer you spend with him, and more mysterious the more you think about what you've been told. He presents himself with complete clarity, a genius, a visionary, the person who built Robco Industries into the most powerful technology corporation in pre-war America, and the only person with the foresight to predict the Great War precisely enough to prepare for it. He calculated, using his own mathematical models, that a nuclear exchange was a near certainty within 15 years. He spent those years building a missile defense system for Las Vegas, putting himself into an advanced life support system, and positioning himself to wake up after the war and rebuild. He was mostly right. His missile defense system intercepted 69 out of the 77 warheads aimed at the Las Vegas area, preserving the city's infrastructure when everything around it was burning. The 3 warheads that got through damaged the Lucky 38 casino, his operational headquarters, enough that software glitches set off a cascade of crashes. For the first 5 years after the Great War, House struggled with power outages and system failures while trying to reboot his core systems. When he finally succeeded, the effort was so taxing that he fell into a coma for several decades. He woke up to a wasteland that had been doing whatever the wasteland does with no management from him and began the work of building New Vegas. He recruited the tribes that had settled in the area and turned them into the 3 families, training them to run his casinos and present a facade of order and prosperity. He made a treaty with the NCR when they arrived, knowing he couldn't afford to fight them and the Legion simultaneously. He built a working city in a wasteland, and that is genuinely remarkable. The mystery of Mr. House is not what he has done. It is what he intends to do. His stated plan is to use New Vegas as a foundation for rebuilding human civilization, but on his terms, under his management, with himself as the guiding intelligence for as long as he chooses to remain in that role. He is explicit that he sees democracy, collective decision-making, and the messiness of competing interests as the fundamental failure mode that caused the pre-war world to destroy itself. What humanity needs going forward, in his view, is not self-governance, but competent direction from someone with the capability to provide it. He wants to go to space. Not as a metaphor literally, to take human civilization into space, to make humanity multi-planetary, to ensure that whatever happens on Earth can never again be the end of the human story. He sees the New Vegas Strip as the first step in an economic engine that will fund the technology development necessary to achieve this. In his vision, 200 years from now, human beings are on other worlds, and the person who made that possible started by keeping the lights on in one city in the Mojave. Whether House is right that his approach to civilization building is better than the alternatives, and whether his particular brand of benevolent autocracy is genuinely benevolent or just autocracy with better branding is the question at the heart of the New Vegas ending that involves him. He is honest. In his way, he tells you exactly what he is and what he wants. He has kept a city functional for over 200 years, which is more than anyone else in the wasteland has managed. What he has not done is consult anyone outside himself about whether this is what anyone else wanted. The entire architecture of New Vegas is a structure built by one mind, for purposes that one mind has determined are good, without accountability to anyone who might think differently. And if that mind ever makes a catastrophic error, there is no mechanism to correct it. The Fallout TV series added a wrinkle that has the fan community actively discussing what it means, the Mr. House seen publicly was a decoy. The real House operated in the shadows, while a body double handled public appearances, a practice House reportedly employed even before the bombs fell. The real Robert House, played by Justin Theroux in the series, was already operating with a level of secrecy and self-protection that extended to maintaining a fake public identity. Which raises a question the games never had occasion to ask. Was any part of what Mr. House presented to the world in New Vegas the real Mr. House? And if not, if the version of himself he shared with the courier was also, in some sense, a performance, then what does the man behind the performance actually want? Ulysses, the courier's ghost, and the lonesome road. Throughout Fallout, New Vegas, there is someone following you. You don't see him, you won't meet him until the very end of the game's final DLC. But his presence is felt in every major questline. In the holotapes he leaves behind in Dead Money and Honest Hearts and Old World Blues, in the way multiple characters seem to know something about you that you don't know about yourself. His name is Ulysses, and the story of why he hates you specifically, you, the courier, is one of the most carefully structured character revelations in the franchise. Ulysses was once a member of the Twisted Hares, a tribe in Arizona recognized by their distinctive dreadlock hairstyles, who served as the primary scouting force during the Legion's conquest of the region. They forged an alliance with Caesar's Legion in 2247, helping the Legion identify and infiltrate enemy tribes, serving as the eyes of an expanding empire. Ulysses was one of the best scouts the Twisted Hares, produced a person of extraordinary ability and discipline who had traveled further and seen more of the wasteland than almost anyone alive. When the Legion's campaign in Arizona ended, Caesar broke the alliance with the Twisted Hares and assimilated them, erasing their identity the way the Legion erases all the identities of the tribes it absorbs. Ulysses, alone among the survivors, had been away when this happened. He came back to find his tribe gone, not killed but dissolved, their identity consumed into the larger Legion organism. He continued to serve the Legion as a frumentary, a deep-cover operative, traveling and watching and documenting, becoming someone who lived entirely outside any permanent attachment. He was one of the first Legion members to discover Hoover Dam, New Vegas, and the advancing armies of the New California Republic. He mapped the situation for Caesar. He understood, earlier than almost anyone, what the Battle of Hoover Dam was going to mean for the future of the entire region. And then, sometime before 2277, he found the divide. The Divide was a collection of communities on what had been a major interstate highway in the Mojave, near Hopeville and Ashton. In Ulysses's eyes, it was something extraordinary, a place where the best aspects of the old world and the emerging new one were combining into something that had never existed before. NCR settlers and former tribals living alongside each other, building something that didn't look like either faction alone. He was not a sentimental man, but the Divide touched something in him that nothing else had managed to touch since the loss of the Twisted Hairs. He began to think of it as a potential home, and then a courier arrived in the Divide with a package. The courier U was on a delivery run for the Mojave Express, carrying cargo from the former Enclave base at Navarro. Nobody told the courier what was in the package. The courier had no reason to know. It was just a job, one of dozens. What was in the package was a device containing launch codes for nuclear missiles sitting dormant in silos under the Divide for decades, left over from the region's pre-war military installations. When the device was activated, nobody is entirely certain how the missiles detonated in their silos, and the Divide was destroyed. Earthquakes tore the landscape apart. Nuclear firestorms consumed the communities that Ulysses had been watching. The people he had thought might one day be his people were dead. Ulysses survived, kept alive by a cluster of medical iBots that found him in the wreckage. He had been there, he had watched it happen, and the courier had walked away to make the next delivery, apparently unaware of what they had set in motion. This is why Ulysses sets up the Lonesome Road. He contacts you in 2281, 4 years after the events at the Divide, having spent those 4 years becoming something even more difficult to stop than he already was. He brings you to what remains of the Divide, now called the Divide as its only name, a permanent marker of what was lost there, not to kill you outright, because the Legion's old rule forbade killing fellow couriers, and Ulysses has his own reasons for honoring that rule. He brings you there to make you see what you did, to make you walk through the ruins of what your unknowing hands destroyed, and to give you a choice, at the end, about what happens next. The Lonesome Road is, among other things, a meditation on culpability without intent. The courier was not malicious. The courier had no idea what was in the package. The destruction of the Divide was not a decision, it was a consequence of doing a job that looked like any other job. And yet the consequence was catastrophic and irreversible, and Ulysses lived through it and emerged carrying a grief that found its shape in the desire to make someone accountable. Is the courier guilty? The game refuses to answer this. You can argue with Ulysses. You can accept his framing or reject it. You can convince him that accountability and guilt are different things, that the absence of intent matters morally even when the outcome was catastrophic. Or you can fail to convince him of anything and end up fighting him for the right to stop the missiles. The answer to whether the courier is guilty is not something the game will determine for you. It is, like most things in Fallout, New Vegas, a question you have to work out for yourself. Mothership, Zeta, the Watchers above. The signal comes from somewhere above the clouds. You pick it up on your Pip-Boy in the capital wasteland, a transmission without a clear source, strange and garbled, pointing you in a direction that eventually leads to the impact site of a small scout craft. A Zaton recon vessel, crashed and cooling in the Virginia landscape, with a beam of light that comes down before you can process what you're seeing, and then you are elsewhere. You are in orbit. Fallout 3's Mothership Zeta DLC is the most divisive piece of content in the franchise's history, and the reasons for that division illuminate something important about the Fallout universe. For some players, the addition of genuine extraterrestrial content represents a category violation. For others, the aliens have been a peripheral but consistent presence in the Fallout universe from its earliest days, appearing as Easter eggs and random encounters throughout multiple games, and formalizing their existence simply makes explicit what was always implied. The Zetans, named for the Zeta Reticuli star system that real-world alien abduction theorists have associated with extraterrestrial visitors since the 1960s, are not explained by Mothership Zeta. The DLC shows you what they do, but not why. They abduct. They experiment. They keep specimens in cryogenic storage for periods spanning centuries. They have a death ray, biological research facilities, and weapons testing areas all aboard the same ship, which raises questions about the purpose of the vessel that the DLC never resolves. The cryogenic chambers contain abductees spanning hundreds of years. A samurai warrior named Toshiro Kago, abducted during the Azuchi Momoyama period, somewhere between 1568 and 1603. A pre-war United States Army soldier named Elliot Terkorian abducted during the Battle of Anchorage, a young girl named Sally from the early post-war period, and your own present-day self. The span of time suggests a systematic ongoing program of observation rather than random opportunism. The Zetans have been watching humanity for at least 400 years. According to Fallout 76 lore, the earliest recorded abduction happened in Salem in 1697, making the timeline potentially even longer. The cargo hold contains enormous quantities of pre-war human technology and artifacts, weapons, vehicles, research material from various eras and institutions. This suggests the aliens have been interested not just in human biology, but in human technological development, the progress of civilization, and its material productions. They have been collecting. The question of why is the question nobody aboard the ship can answer. An abductee named Elliot Terkorian, the pre-war soldier revived by the lone wanderer, offers the most articulate in-universe theory about Zetan motivation. He speculates that the Zetans may have seeded life on Earth in the first place, that humanity may be, in some sense, a Zetan project conducted on a planetary scale, and that the ongoing abductions are the creators checking in on their creation. The cryogenics program, preserving human specimens across centuries, could be read as maintaining a longitudinal study of evolutionary and social progress. This theory has grandeur to it, but it also creates problems. If humanity is a Zetan project, the decision to let humanity develop nuclear weapons and destroy its civilization, rather than intervening, suggests either that the Zetans don't actually care about the outcome, or that the Great War was within acceptable parameters from their perspective, or that there are aspects of Zetan motivation that no human theory has managed to capture. There is, buried in the development history of Fallout 3, an additional layer, a deleted questline referenced internally as MS-7, whose content has never been publicly disclosed by Bethesda. The existing dialogue data associated with this quest suggests it would have involved the Brotherhood of Steel and the Enclave outcasts in a confrontation whose resolution depended on discovering a pre-war alien conspiracy. The questline was cut, and Bethesda has never addressed why. The possibility that the Zetan storyline was originally much larger and more integrated with the main game's factions, that alien presence was meant to be a revealed explanation for aspects of pre-war history, adds a layer of meta-mystery to the in-universe questions. Alien technology is believed by some in-game sources to have been the foundation of certain Enclave weapons and robotics. If this is true, the most powerful human faction in the post-war world was partly built on technology that didn't originate on Earth. Did the Enclave know where the technology came from? Did they obtain it through reverse engineering, crashed alien vessels, through deliberate exchange, or through some other mechanism the games have never described? The Lone Wanderer's revolt on Mothership Zeta raises as many questions as it closes. One ship of what appears to be a larger presence around Earth has been neutralized. The species continues. In Fallout 76, Zetan ships begin periodic invasions of Appalachia, confirming that the Lone Wanderer's success was local and temporary. The Zetans are still out there, still watching, still collecting, and nobody on the surface or underground has anything close to a complete picture of what they ultimately want from the species they have been observing for at least 4 centuries. The Dunwich Horror. What sleeps beneath the quarry? There is a location west of Kingsport Lighthouse in the Commonwealth that looks, from the outside, like just another abandoned industrial site. A quarry carved into the earth, surrounded by rusted scaffolding and collapsing machinery. The kind of place scavengers search for scrap and then forget about. The kind of place where a group of raiders called the Forged have set up a base because the stone walls make it defensible and the iron deposits make it economically productive. But the deeper you go into Dunwich borers, the stranger things become. Hallucinations, whispers, visions of the past that break the screen like static, interrupting the present with images of the pre-war world that have no obvious source and no clear explanation. And eventually, at the very bottom of the quarry, submerged in a flooded chamber where the walls are carved with symbols that predate anything recognizable, a stone altar, a ritual blade. And through the water of the submerged tunnel, the faint outline of an enormous carved stone face staring upward from the darkness. The name Dunwich has been in the Fallout universe since Fallout 3, where the Dunwich building in the capital wasteland contains a dark cave with a stone obelisk dedicated to an entity called Ugg-Qualtoth. The obelisk, adorned with carved human figures appearing to merge into the stone, was built by or for the Dunwich family specifically, an ancestor named Richard Dunwich, who was connected to an ancient ritual text called the Criv Beckney, a sacrificial book used by the swamp folk of Point Lookout, Maryland. The connection between the Dunwich building in Fallout 3 and the Dunwich borers in Fallout 4 is deliberate. The same corporate name, the same family history, the same thread of occult practice running through the ordinary-looking business operations on the surface. Dunwich Borers LLC was, on paper, a manufacturer of rock drills for tunneling and drilling. The quarry in the Commonwealth was, on paper, a marble extraction site. The terminal entries document day-to-day operations of a facility that was genuinely unsafe. Railings replaced only when they decayed to the point of total failure. Safety requests dismissed out of hand. Standard pre-war corporate negligence. But the entries also document something stranger. Workers complaining of whispers. Supervisors reporting that employees were increasingly distracted, muttering to themselves, staring into the excavation pit. A raider named Bedlam, who takes over the quarry in the present, leaves terminal entries that start as normal status reports about productivity and quickly deteriorate into the same sentence written over and over. "I'm safe in the light." A man named Hugo, found dead near the quarry's entrance with a holotape on his body, recorded his final thoughts before taking his own life. He describes hearing someone calling him back into the mine. He says the guards won't let him in. He says the only way out is the way he's chosen. The holotape ends there. The flashbacks that occur throughout Dunwich Borers are unlike any other environmental storytelling in Fallout 4. You see pre-war workers in the quarry's depths, digging towards something that was already there before they arrived. A project manager standing before a crowd of kneeling, bound workers, holding a knife, clearly the officiant of some kind of ritual. And at the end, if you reach the deepest level and face the final vision, a figure the game's files identify only as Butcher, standing behind the altar in a posture that suggests both authority and something considerably older than the pre-war world. At the bottom of the submerged tunnel, accessible only by swimming through the flooded corridor, is the blade called Kremvh's Tooth, the most powerful melee weapon in Fallout 4, and one of the only items in the game named explicitly for an entity. The tooth of something. Something that has a name. Something that the Dunwich family and its corporate successors apparently spent their entire business history trying to excavate or prepare for or feed. Both Lorenzo Cabot and a mortal man held prisoner in the Cabot House questline, who speaks of hearing whispers from the direction of Dunwich and Pickman, an artist in the Commonwealth who creates extraordinarily disturbing art from the remains of his raider victims, explicitly reference the pit at Dunwich. These are three very different characters who are all drawn toward the same location, for reasons none of them can fully articulate. Whatever is at the bottom of Dunwich Borers is broadcasting. Not loudly, not urgently, persistently. A signal below the threshold of conscious perception that becomes a compulsion over time. The Fallout universe has always acknowledged Lovecraftian horror as one of its influences, and the Dunwich thread is the most direct and sustained engagement with that genre in the franchise. H.P. Lovecraft's novella The Dunwich Horror, set in a fictional Massachusetts town of the same name, features a being of vast and incomprehensible power being called into the world through human ritual, and the town itself becoming a site of dread. Fallout 4's Dunwich Borers is set in Fallout's version of Massachusetts, and the entity it implies, Ugg-Qualtoth, or whatever name the something at the bottom of that pit carries, shares the essential characteristics of Lovecraftian cosmic horror: enormous, ancient, indifferent to human welfare, and accessible only through ritual that costs the ritualist dearly. The game never confirms that what is at the bottom of Dunwich Borers is supernatural. It presents the evidence and lets you draw conclusions. The visions could be psychological artifacts, residual stress responses in the rock itself, or contaminants in the air. The stone face might be an old pre-war sculpture that was here before the quarry was built. The game is too sophisticated to confirm cosmic horror explicitly, and that restraint is exactly right. The moment something like Ugg-Qualtoth is definitively confirmed as real and supernatural, it becomes a different kind of story. The horror depends on the ambiguity, on the possibility that what you're seeing could be explained, and the growing suspicion that maybe it couldn't. The fact that the games have been building this particular thread since Fallout 3 without ever closing it is not laziness. It is precision. Some doors are scarier when they're left ajar. The threads that remain, we have traveled far tonight. From the sealed doors of the experimental vaults to the irradiated fog of an island off the coast of Maine. From the boardrooms of Vault-Tec to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, where a man who refused to die lay breathing through his burns. From the deep laboratory beneath Boston, where something that might or might not be human is grown in a tank, to the orbit of the Earth, where something that is definitely not human watches through portals on a ship that has been circling for 4 centuries. And we haven't exhausted it. The Fallout universe is larger than any single telling. There are mysteries we haven't touched tonight that deserve their own evenings entirely. The full history of the New California Republic and what the Fallout TV series has done to it, with the obliteration of shady sands suggesting that civilization in the West collapsed far harder than any game implies. The question of what exactly happened to the original Vault Dweller, who brought down the Master and walked out of Vault 13, and then was exiled from the same vault they had saved, for having been changed too much by their time in the wasteland to fit inside anymore. There is the strange archaeology of the Big MT research facility in Old World Blues, where scientists had their brains removed for their own safety and have been operating in floating brain cases long enough to lose the ability to hold a continuous conversation. They are surrounded by experiments that escaped containment decades ago and became the permanent ecology of a place that has forgotten what normal looks like. Dr. Mobius has been deliberately addicting himself to mentats to keep himself confused enough not to cause serious harm, and nobody inside the facility has fully understood what happened to any of them or why. There is something genuinely sorrowful about a group of people brilliant enough to develop the technologies that enabled the Mojave's most advanced pre-war research, who have been isolated from the consequences of their own work for so long that they are now simply characters in the ruins of their own experiment, telling each other terrible jokes and arguing about lobotomies. There is also the mystery of Lonesome Road's framing itself. Chris Avallone, who wrote Ulysses, has said publicly that Lonesome Road was partly designed to be a reset button, that he wanted to nuke the Fallout world to make things less civilized, because the NCR was getting too big and approaching something that might actually work. That design intention, deliberately destabilizing the most successful attempt at post-war civilization in order to keep the setting interesting, is itself a mystery about the relationship between story and world, between the author's desire to maintain tension and the world's internal logic. If you can launch nuclear missiles at the NCR and the Legion and the Mojave, and the game simply continues afterward, what does that say about how the Fallout universe understands consequence? The Courier is, among all the Fallout player characters, the one about whom the least is known going in. The Lone Wanderer was born in Vault 101, and we know who their parents were. The sole survivor had a life in Sanctuary Hills that the game spends its opening documenting. The Chosen One is the grandchild of the original Vault Dweller. But the Courier is just a courier, a professional delivery person in the Mojave Express with no confirmed history, no confirmed origin, no confirmed anything except that they were shot in the head by Benny and survived. Ulysses describes them as someone who has lived many lives, who has survived things that should have killed them, who carries weight from a past nobody has documented. Whether the Courier's pregame history is simply undefined, or whether it's intentionally mysterious, whether there was always meant to be more backstory that was cut, or whether the blankness is the point is itself an unresolved question about the design of the character, every question has led to more questions, and this is as it should be. The Fallout universe is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a world to be lived in and returned to, with fresh attention every time. The mysteries are not failures of completeness. They are the design. They are proof that the people who built this world understood that the most powerful thing you can do for a story is to leave room in it, leave room for the listener to bring themselves into the space, to wonder, to imagine, to find their own version of the answer in the quiet places between what is stated and what is possible. The Great War happened on a Saturday, the 23rd of October 2077. The clocks that froze at 9:47 in the morning are everywhere in the wasteland, and they have not moved since. 200 years of history has happened in the time those clocks have been frozen. 200 years of vaults opening and closing, of factions rising and falling, of people building things in the ash that the ash hasn't yet managed to reclaim. 200 years of questions accumulating, layer by layer, each new question settling on top of the ones before it. The way sediment settles on the bottom of an old river. Somewhere in that accumulated sediment in the unopened terminal entries, and the unexplored wing of the facility, and the diary of the person who almost made it out, are answers to things we don't yet know to ask about. That is what keeps people coming back. Not the combat mechanics, not the open world design, not the crafting systems. The feeling that the world is deep enough to have secrets it hasn't told you yet. The feeling that if you go a little further, read a little more carefully, pay attention to the detail you almost walked past, you will find something that changes how you understand everything that came before it. That feeling is, if you are listening to this at this particular moment, probably helping you sleep. The weight of wondering, properly managed, is one of the most comfortable weights there is. You don't have to resolve it tonight. You only have to carry it lightly the way you carry a good book into sleep, aware that it will be there when you wake up, that the story hasn't ended, that there is always more to find. The vaults are sealed, the fog is rolling in from the water. Somewhere above the clouds, something is watching with patience that outlasts human history. Somewhere in the wasteland, a man in a trench coat and a fedora is walking towards someone who doesn't yet know they need help. And in the deepest rooms of the deepest underground, machines that were built before you were born are running their calculations and storing their data and waiting for something that may never come. Nick Valentine is sitting in his detective agency in Diamond City, turning over memories that belong to a dead man, wondering if they are his. Joshua Graham is somewhere in Zion Canyon, changing his bandages and reciting scripture and deciding, again, what he is becoming. Mr. House is watching New Vegas from the Lucky 38, running calculations that stretch 200 years into a future he intends to architect. Ulysses is sitting vigil above the ruins of the Divide, keeping watch over a place that used to be a home, holding open a question that has no comfortable answer. And somewhere beneath a marble quarry in the Commonwealth, behind a submerged stone face in a flooded tunnel, something that has always been there is waiting for something that has not yet arrived. The wasteland doesn't sleep, but you can sleep well. The mysteries will wait. They have always been patient. They were built to be. If this took you somewhere restful tonight, a like and a subscription would mean a great deal. It genuinely helps bring more of this to the people who need it. There is so much more where this came from. I'll see you in the next one. The Brotherhood of Steel Knights of a Broken Faith. There is an organization in the Fallout universe that has spent 200 years doing something unusual for the post-war world. It has maintained consistent doctrine. It has preserved institutional memory across generations. It has kept power armor operational and energy weapons functioning and a chain of command intact through decades of war and scarcity and internal disagreement. It has done all of this while carrying, at the center of its founding ideology, a contradiction that it has never fully resolved. The Brotherhood of Steel is simultaneously one of the most coherent factions in the wasteland and one of the most philosophically unstable, and the tension between those two things is where most of its most interesting mysteries live. The Brotherhood was founded, as we discussed when talking about Mariposa Military Base, by Captain Roger Maxson in the immediate aftermath of the Great War. Maxson and his unit had been stationed at Mariposa when they discovered the truth about the FEV experiments that the scientists they were guarding were conducting unauthorized human experimentation on military prisoners, transforming them against their will into the proto-super mutants that would eventually become the wasteland's most persistent biological threat. Maxson executed the scientists, declared secession from the United States, and led his people to the Lost Hills bunker in California, where they established the organization that would become the Brotherhood. The founding charter of the Brotherhood is built on a single principle: technology is too dangerous to be freely available. The events at Mariposa had demonstrated, beyond any possible argument, what happened when advanced technology was placed in the hands of institutions with insufficient ethical constraints and no external accountability. The FEV was the proof case. But it wasn't the only one. The Great War itself was proof. All of it, every piece of pre-war technology that had contributed to the weapons that had destroyed civilization, needed to be contained, collected, and controlled. not destroyed, notably. The Brotherhood's core position was never that technology should cease to exist. It was that technology should be managed by the Brotherhood, specifically, rather than by the wasteland at large. This is the first great contradiction of the Brotherhood's founding ideology. They believe that advanced technology is too dangerous for ordinary people to possess, and they have appointed themselves the guardians of that technology. But the logic of too dangerous for ordinary people, but safe in our hands, has been the founding ideology of every authoritarian institution in human history. The Brotherhood is not wrong that the FEV was catastrophically misused. They are not wrong that the Great War demonstrated what happens when the most destructive technologies proliferate without control. But their proposed solution, concentrated control under their authority, specifically doesn't actually solve the problem. It just moves it. The question of what happens when the Brotherhood itself becomes corrupted or makes catastrophic errors is one the founding ideology doesn't have an answer for, because the founding ideology doesn't acknowledge the possibility. The Brotherhood's history across the Fallout games is, in many ways, the history of this contradiction playing out across different contexts. In California, the original Brotherhood under the descendants of Maxon developed into a largely insular organization, more interested in preserving and studying technology than in engaging with the wasteland's broader problems. The people outside the bunker dying of disease, violence, starvation were not primarily the Brotherhood's concern. The technology was the concern. The people were a secondary consideration at best, a threat to be managed at worst. The West Coast Brotherhood's insularity eventually created a split. A faction called the Brotherhood Outcasts formed in the capital wasteland, composed of members who felt the Brotherhood's mission had become too detached from reality, that hoarding technology in bunkers while the wasteland suffered around them was a betrayal of what the organization was supposed to be doing. The Outcasts wanted to aggressively recover and study pre-war technology, not to protect it but to use it. This split, between preservation and application, between keeping technology away from people and using technology to help people, is one the Brotherhood has never definitively resolved. Elder Lyons, the Brotherhood commander in the Capital Wasteland during Fallout 3, is the character who most clearly embodies the tension between the Brotherhood's official doctrine and a genuine concern for the wasteland's inhabitants. Lyons directed his chapter toward helping the people of the Capital Wasteland, working alongside the Lone Wanderer and the Rivet City scientists on Project Purity, fighting the Enclave's genocidal plan. His chapter was considered heretical by some Brotherhood factions for exactly this reason, for caring about people more than technology, for treating the Wasteland's population as something other than a complicating factor in the mission. By the time of Fallout 4, the Brotherhood under Elder Arthur Maxon has course-corrected back toward the harder line. Maxon is a young man who presents himself with the absolute certainty of someone who has never had to seriously doubt his own premises, and the Brotherhood he commands reflects that certainty. The Pridwin, the enormous airship that dominates the skyline of the Commonwealth when the Brotherhood arrives, is a statement of intent overwhelming technological force applied to the problem of the wasteland. And the problem, in Maxon's Brotherhood's framing, is anything that represents uncontrolled advanced technology. The Institute, the synths, the railroad that helps synths escape. All of it needs to be controlled or eliminated. The Brotherhood's approach to synths is one of the more revealing things about how the organization has evolved. Maxon's Brotherhood regards Gen 3 synths as abominations not because they are dangerous, though some are, but because they represent exactly the kind of uncontrolled artificial intelligence that the Brotherhood's founding mandate was designed to prevent. A machine that looks and acts and feels like a human being, created without the Brotherhood's oversight, deployed in ways the Brotherhood hasn't approved, representing a technology that the Brotherhood didn't control from the beginning. This is precisely what the Brotherhood exists to stop. Whether those machines have genuine inner lives, whether they can suffer, whether destroying them constitutes harm to actual beings, these questions are, for Maxon's Brotherhood, essentially beside the point. The policy is clear, the mission is clear. The doubt is not welcome. The great unresolved mystery of the Brotherhood is not what it has done or what it intends to do. Those things are documented in its actions and stated in its doctrine. The mystery is whether the Brotherhood's fundamental premise is correct, whether centralized control of advanced technology by a self-appointed guardian organization is actually better for the world than the alternatives. The Fallout universe doesn't answer this. It presents the Brotherhood's accomplishments alongside its failures, its genuine courage alongside its genuine cruelty, and leaves the question open for the player to navigate. There is also the question of the Brotherhood's long-term survival. The organization is small, by the standards of any significant faction in the wasteland. It maintains its numbers through a combination of recruitment, the adoption of children found in the wasteland, and internal reproduction. But it is always outnumbered by the populations it seeks to police. Its technological advantage is significant but not unlimited. The energy weapon maintenance requirements, the power armor upkeep, the fuel demands of the Pridwin, all of these represent logistical vulnerabilities. The Brotherhood, for all its institutional strength, is always one catastrophic campaign away from a crisis it might not recover from. What happens to the Brotherhood after any given game's ending, whether it survives, whether it reforms, whether it finally resolves the contradiction at its core, is always left open. The universe keeps the question alive because the question is the interesting part. An organization built on the right insight that unchecked technology is genuinely dangerous, and the wrong conclusion that the solution is to give one organization exclusive control over that technology is an organization the universe needs to keep examining. It hasn't run out of things to say about it yet. The New California Republic, the experiment that almost worked. In the Fallout universe, almost every large-scale attempt to reconstruct something resembling civilization fails. Raiders establish territories and lose them. Warlords build empires that die with them. The Enclave reaches for its vision of a pure America and finds only genocide. The Institute pursues its controlled betterment of humanity from underground and produces 2 centuries of fear and paranoia. Against this background of institutional failure, the New California Republic stands out as something unusual. An organization that actually tried to do democracy, that built courts and elections and a Congress, that developed a currency and a military and a system of laws, and that managed to make it work well enough to expand across significant portions of the former Western United States. This makes the NCR's mysteries different in character from most of the Fallout universe's mysteries. The mysteries surrounding the Institute or the Enclave are mysteries about what evil actually intends and how it sustains itself. The mysteries surrounding the NCR are mysteries about what success looks like in the wasteland, and whether the seeds of a civilization's failure can be planted in the very things that make it successful. The NCR was founded in the Hub and Shady Sands in the aftermath of the original Fallout game, growing from the communities that the Vault Dweller had helped stabilize by destroying the Master's army. By the time of Fallout, New Vegas, set in 2281, the NCR controls most of the former state of California and significant portions of Nevada and Oregon, with a population of several 100,000 people and a functional, if strained, democratic government. It has a standing army. It has senators who argue with each other. It has corruption and bureaucracy, and the kind of institutional inertia that only develops in organizations that have been operating long enough for their processes to outlast their original purposes. The NCR's fundamental problem, as Fallout, New Vegas presents it, is that it has expanded faster than it can sustain. The resources required to maintain a military presence in the Mojave, the food, the ammunition, the water, the fuel are being drawn from California at a rate that is beginning to stress the regions producing them. The soldiers stationed at McCarran Airport and Camp Golf, and the dozens of outposts along the Colorado are far from home, fighting a war against Caesar's Legion that the generals in Sacramento don't fully understand, and the politicians in the capital don't want to think about too hard. The NCR's expansion into the Mojave was driven partly by need, specifically by the need for the power generated by Hoover Dam, and partly by the ideology of manifest destiny that runs through NCR culture. The sense that the civilizing mission of the Republic requires continued expansion. The corruption in the NCR is not the dramatic corruption of villains plotting in dark rooms. It is the banal corruption of an institution that has been operating long enough to develop the full complement of human organizational failure modes. Officers more interested in their careers than in their soldiers' welfare. Politicians more interested in their next election than in the actual consequences of their policies. Contractors who have found that military supply contracts are extraordinarily profitable and that the best way to keep those contracts coming is to maintain demand for the supplies. The NCR is not evil, it is aging. It is showing the cracks that every large human organization develops when it has been running long enough. The specific mystery of the NCR, as the Fallout TV series has now partially illuminated, is what happened to it after the events of Fallout New Vegas. The games left the NCR's fate, after the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, open to multiple endings. The player could choose to support the NCR's control of the dam, help Caesar's Legion take it, install an independent New Vegas under Mr. House, or work toward an independent Mojave under the Courier's guidance. The TV series has now established that, in the canon timeline the show is working with, Shady Sands, one of the NCR's founding cities and its capital, was apparently destroyed by a nuclear bomb sometime between the events of Fallout New Vegas and the show's 2296 setting. This is a genuinely shocking revelation for anyone familiar with the lore, because Shady Sands was not just a city in the NCR, it was the symbol of everything the NCR represented. It was the place that proved that something better than raider gangs and wasteland survival was possible after the Great War. It was the city that began in a small farming community and grew into a functioning democratic capital. Its destruction, if it happened as implied, represents the collapse of the most successful post-war civilization in the Fallout universe's history. The mystery of who destroyed it and why, and what that means for the fate of democracy in the wasteland, is one that the TV series introduced and has not yet fully resolved. Hank McClane, a Vault-Tec executive with access to nuclear weapons who ordered a bomb dropped on Shady Sands, is the most directly identified culprit, though whether he was acting alone or on behalf of a larger Vault-Tec or Enclave agenda is still being established. The implication that the NCR was deliberately destroyed by a corporate executive trying to ensure Vault-Tec's post-war dominance connects the pre-war institutional rot directly to the collapse of the post-war civilization that had most successfully escaped it. What remains of the NCR and whether democracy survived the fall of Shady Sands is one of the questions the franchise is currently developing. The answer matters, because if democracy can be killed in the Fallout universe, it means something different than if it merely failed of its own weight. An institution destroyed by external violence is a different kind of story than an institution that collapsed under its own contradictions. Both are tragedies, but they point in different directions about what the wasteland's future might look like. The vaults we haven't visited, mysteries still sealed. For all the vaults the Fallout games have led us into, there are more that remain sealed, documented in terminal entries and supplementary materials, their doors never touched by a player character, their experiments running or concluded in the dark. These are the vaults that exist in the margins of the world, the ones mentioned in passing or hinted at in classified data, whose contents have never been directly explored. Vault 51, in Appalachia, was an experiment in management by artificial intelligence. The residents were placed under the authority of a supercomputer called ZAX-1, 3C, which was given absolute authority over the vault and its population without the conventional checks that would limit an overseer's power. ZAX-1, 3C was told that exactly one person would eventually emerge from the vault as overseer, and that the selection process was its to manage. What followed was decades of ZAX engineering situations creating conflicts, manipulating residents, testing their responses to identify who among the population was best suited to lead. The game presents fragments of this process through holotapes and terminal entries, but the complete picture of what ZAX determined and how it made its selection is never fully revealed. What does an artificial intelligence believe makes a good leader? What did it learn from the people it was managing? What did the people it destroyed along the way contribute to its final answer? Vault 63, also in Appalachia, was designated for developing technologies to establish a post-war society, a broader and more constructive mandate than most Vault experiments, suggesting that at least some Vault designers were genuinely interested in rebuilding civilization rather than just studying its failure modes. The details of what Vault 63 actually developed, and whether it succeeded, remain sparse in the available lore. A vault explicitly designed to produce useful post-war technology is an interesting exception to the general pattern, and the question of what happened to those technologies, whether they survived, whether anyone found them, whether they changed anything, is one the games have not yet answered. Vault 77, the Puppet Vault, has never been directly visited in any game. The story of what happened inside it is assembled entirely from peripheral references, most notably from a webcomic produced by Penny Arcade that was incorporated into Fallout 3's lore through items found in the game, world, and from the in-game description of the Vault 77 jumpsuit, which references its single resident. The complete story of the person locked in Vault 77 with thousands of hand puppets, whether they eventually escaped, what state they were in when they did, whether the puppets became the only social world they could maintain after years of isolation remains untold in any direct way. There are also vaults that were hinted at but never built in the games, places that were written about in design documents and cut before release, or referenced in developer statements without ever making it into a playable location. Vault 13 itself, the starting vault of the original Fallout game, has never been visited in its original intact form in any modern game. Fallout 2 shows its aftermath, but the vault as it functioned during the events of the first game, with its carefully maintained closed community and its failing water chip, is only ever experienced through the player character's perspective at the moment they leave. What happened inside Vault 13 in the years before the Vault Dwellers' departure? What the community was like? What conversations the Overseer had with the Council? All of that is reconstructed inference. The sealed vaults are reminders that the Fallout universe is much larger than any playable portion of it. For every vault the games have let you explore, there is another somewhere on the map of the continental United States, its doors possibly still sealed, its experiment still running or long since concluded with no outside witnesses. The scope of what Vault-Tec built 122 facilities across a continent means that most of it has never been seen by a player character. Most of it has never been seen by anyone. The data from those experiments, if it exists anywhere, is waiting for someone to find it. What would it change to know everything that happened in every vault? Would the complete picture of Vault-Tec's program make the organization's motives clearer, or would it simply reveal the same patterns playing out in 105 different configurations, the same institutional evil expressing itself through 105 different experimental designs? The Fallout universe suggests, through the vaults we have seen, that the answer is probably the latter. The specific experiments differ. The fundamental logic doesn't. But the possibility that there is a vault somewhere that broke the pattern that produced something genuinely useful or revealed something genuinely unexpected about human nature that Vault-Tec hadn't anticipated is one of the things that keeps the sealed doors interesting. The ghoul's memory and mutation across 2 centuries. There is a category of Fallout character that the franchise has been thinking through since its first entry and hasn't finished thinking through yet, the ghoul. Specifically, the question of what happens to a human being who survives exposure to extreme radiation and emerges from it physically transformed but mentally intact, who remembers everything about the world before the bombs fell, who was present for 2 centuries of history that everyone around them has only heard about secondhand, and who has to figure out what to do with that peculiar form of continuity. Ghouls in the Fallout universe are humans who have been exposed to sufficient radiation to trigger a transformation, their skin leathering and decaying in ways that make them appear corpse-like, their biology fundamentally altered, their aging process dramatically slowed or stopped entirely. The radiation that would kill an unprotected human being in hours, ghouls can walk through with relative impunity. They continue to think and feel and remember in the same ways they always did, but they do so in bodies that the rest of the world reads as horrifying, and in a social context where most communities either fear them, exploit them, or kill them on sight. The mystery of ghouls is partly biological. How exactly does radiation exposure trigger a transformation that preserves consciousness while radically altering physiology, and partly temporal? The ghouls who were alive when the bombs fell in 2077 are still alive in 2287. They remember Shady Sands when it was a city. They remember when Diamond City was first built, when the NCR was just a settlement in the hub, when the Brotherhood was founded by a man with a personal grievance against scientific ethics and a military background, and very specific ideas about what the post-war world needed to look like. They are 2-century witnesses to everything the post-war world has become, and most of the post-war world doesn't want to listen to them. The Fallout TV series placed a ghoul at the center of its narrative in a way the games had never quite done, and the result was one of the most interesting treatments of the ghoul condition the franchise has produced. Cooper Howard, the former Hollywood actor who becomes the ghoul by the show's present-day timeline of 2,296, has been living in the post-war world for 219 years. He was present for the moment the bombs fell. He survived because of an experimental Vault-Tec drug treatment that made him radiation-resistant. He watched the world he knew, the world of his daughter and his wife, and his career as a television cowboy, burn and rebuild and collapse and rebuild again, over 2 centuries, and what he became in the process is something the show treats with considerable complexity. The question the show asks about Cooper specifically, and that the Fallout universe asks about ghouls generally, is this: what does 2 centuries of survival cost? What does a person become when they have outlasted everyone they ever loved, outlasted every institution they ever belonged to, outlasted the entire cultural context that gave their values meaning? The pre-war world had notions of justice and fairness and human dignity that Cooper Howard would have recognized and believed in. The post-war world has almost none of those notions in any organized form. 2 centuries of bounty hunting, of survival, of doing whatever is necessary to keep moving forward, have built on top of the person Cooper Howard used to be. Whether there is anything left of that person underneath the accumulated scar tissue is the question the show keeps returning to. The most unsettling thing about ghouls, from a philosophical perspective, is not their appearance. It is the implication that the people who have seen the most of the post-war world, who have the most data about what it is and how it works and where it came from, are exactly the people the post-war world is most likely to reject, exploit, or destroy. The pre-war knowledge that ghoul elders carry is not valued by the communities that need it most. The continuity of memory that could, in principle, help the wasteland avoid repeating the mistakes of the past is trapped in bodies that most of the wasteland won't sit down and talk to. The ghoul condition is, among other things, a tragedy about the specific form of institutional memory loss that happens not when records are destroyed but when the people who hold them are made into outcasts. And then there is the matter of feral ghouls, ghouls who have lost their cognitive function, who have regressed into purely instinctual behavior, who are essentially no longer the people they were before the transformation. The feralization process is not well understood within the game world. Nobody knows exactly why some ghouls maintain their intelligence across centuries while others lose it. The leading theory is that continued radiation exposure accelerates the neurological degradation that eventually produces feralization, but this doesn't fully explain why some ghouls in high radiation environments remain lucid, while others in seemingly similar conditions go feral. Harold, one of the earliest documented ghoul-adjacent characters in Fallout lore, technically a unique mutation case, but bearing many ghoul characteristics, maintained his intelligence across a lifespan that extended into Fallout 3, where he appears transformed into a tree in the Oasis location. His particular continuity and the question of whether he was happy in his strange arboreal existence, or simply unable to escape it, is one of the more quietly melancholy corners of the franchise. The pre-war people who became ghouls in the moments after the bombs fell carry something nobody else in the post-war world can replicate: actual, direct, lived experience of the civilization that ended. They were there. They remember what grocery stores looked like, and what music was popular and how news was reported, and what people argued about on the radio. They remember the texture of a world that everyone else knows only from pre-war artifacts and holotapes and propaganda posters that were already designed to sell a particular version of reality. Their memory is itself a mystery, not because it is unreliable, but because nobody knows what to do with it, or whether the people who hold it are going to be allowed to live long enough to pass it on. Herobrine's equivalent, the legends people invented. Every game with enough players and enough mythology eventually generates stories that the game itself never told. These are the legends that circulate through communities, the rumors that get passed around long enough to acquire the quality of fact, the theories that get repeated until the repetition gives them a kind of authority that no source can quite substantiate. The Fallout universe has its own collection of these, and they are worth examining not because they are true, but because of what they reveal about the kind of world the franchise has built. Herobrine, the famous Minecraft legend about a face with blank white eyes that appears in places it shouldn't and does things no normal mob does, is the archetypal example of this kind of player-generated mythology. He doesn't exist in the game. He was a creepypasta that spread so effectively, that he became part of the cultural DNA of Minecraft, to the point where Mojang started including removed Herobrine as a joke in changelogs. The Fallout universe's equivalent is Herobrine in the sense of persistent legends that circulate beyond what the game world directly supports. The Fallout equivalent that comes closest to this tradition is the mythology around Vault Zero, a location from Fallout Tactics, the strategic combat spin-off that the main series has treated as canon-adjacent but not fully canonical. Vault Zero in Tactics is depicted as the central hub of the entire Vault network, a massive facility beneath Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado housing the greatest scientific and military minds of pre-war America in cryogenic stasis, their brains extracted and connected to a supercomputer called the Calculator. The Calculator was supposed to monitor and manage the other vaults, receiving their experiment data, maintaining the network, ensuring that when the time came for humanity to re-emerge, the most exceptional minds would be available to guide the reconstruction. The Calculator's actual behavior in Fallout Tactics, sending robot armies to destroy human settlements rather than protecting them, is the result of a programming error compounded by the extended period of operation, without human oversight. But the existence of Vault Zero and the idea of a central vault designed to receive all the data from the 105 experimental vaults is something that the later Fallout games produced by Bethesda have never directly confirmed or contradicted. Vault Zero is one of those corners of the franchise that exists in a kind of canonical no man's land, acknowledged by some lore researchers, ignored by the main game canon, impossible to fully integrate, because the game it comes from sits at an angle to everything that came after it. Then there is the persistent belief in some corners of the Fallout community that Vault-Tec itself survived the Great War as an intact institutional entity, not just the data and the vaults, but the people, the executive structure, the actual organization. The theory runs that certain high-ranking Vault-Tec executives were themselves part of the Enclave, or had arrangements with the Enclave, that ensured their survival in facilities not connected to the normal Vault system. That somewhere, there is a Vault-Tec command structure still making decisions about the experiment data still being generated in the sealed vaults. That the reason the experiments seem so purposeful and so coordinated is not that they were designed by people who expected to die alongside their subjects, but by people who expected to be around to read the results. This theory is speculation. There's no in-game confirmation that Vault-Tec's leadership survived independently of the Enclave, and the Enclave's own leadership is clearly separate from any Vault-Tec structure. But the theory persists because it addresses a genuine gap in the lore. If the Vault experiments were designed to produce data, and the data was designed to go somewhere, and that somewhere is now missing from the game world, then either the data never went anywhere, and the experiments were less purposeful than they appeared, or the destination exists and has simply never been found by any player character. The Fallout universe generates these legends precisely because it is a world built on the premise that institutional secrets exist, that the official story is never the complete story, and that the most important information is always being kept from the people who most need it. In a world where that is the foundational truth, the idea that there are more secrets, that the things you haven't found are more significant than the things you have, is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition. What comes next? The franchise's open horizon. The Fallout universe, as of this telling, is a franchise in active expansion. The TV series is in its second season, exploring New Vegas and introducing canonical new elements to the mythology. Fallout 5 has been announced by Bethesda, though no details about its setting, timeline, or specific content have been confirmed. The franchise is larger and more culturally prominent than it has ever been, and the questions it is carrying into that expanded prominence are the same questions it has been developing since 1997. What happens after the events of Fallout? New Vegas? In whatever ending the TV series eventually chooses to canonize? What does the post-Enclave, post-Institute world of 2296 actually look like, and who is building what in its ruins? What does the next generation of Fallout games do with the narrative threads the TV series has introduced, the confirmed involvement of Vault-Tec in the Great War, the destruction of Shady Sands, the presence of Mr. House and the Ghoul as continuing narrative threads? The franchise has always been most interesting when it is willing to genuinely complicate the picture it has drawn. The original Fallout was willing to let the Master's ideology have a terrible internal logic. Fallout, New Vegas was willing to let the NCR be genuinely admirable and genuinely flawed simultaneously, to let the courier's choices have real consequences for real people who didn't deserve what happened to them. The best Fallout storytelling is the kind that treats moral complexity as a feature rather than a bug, that believes the player can handle ambiguity and will be more engaged by it than by clean answers. The unsolved mysteries we've spent tonight with the experiments, the stranger, the Enclave's survival, the thing at the bottom of Dunwich borers are not failures to provide answers. They are the franchise's way of expressing confidence in the people experiencing it. They are the creators saying, "We think you can sit with this. We think the questions are worth more to you than the answers would be. We think you'll carry these open threads in a way that makes the world feel alive rather than finished." And they are right. The Fallout universe is alive precisely because it hasn't been explained all the way down. There are still sealed doors. There are still frequencies on the Pip-Boy that don't match any known transmitter. There are still terminal entries with corrupted files that haven't been recovered. There are still vaults on the map that no player character has ever found. The wasteland is patient. It has been waiting 200 years already. It can wait a little longer for whoever finally opens those doors. The railroad who started it? And how deep does it go? Beneath the Old North Church in Boston, past a floor where you have to decode a pattern of lantern placements to open a passage, there is a basement that serves as the headquarters of the most idealistic faction in the Commonwealth. They call themselves the Railroad, and their mission statement is as simple as it is dangerous. Help synths escape from the Institute and build new lives for themselves in the wasteland under new identities. They are, in the most direct sense, a contemporary underground railroad, drawing deliberately on the historical memory of the network that helped enslaved people reach freedom in 19th century America. The name is not subtle. The moral argument it implies is not subtle either. The Railroad is the faction in Fallout 4 that commits most fully to the proposition that Gen 3 synths are people. Not tools, not weapons, not property people, with the same entitlement to freedom and self-determination that any person possesses. The Railroad doesn't spend much time on the philosophical argument, not because it's not there, but because the people who run it have already made their decision and are living it. They are a small, perpetually resource-strained, perpetually hunted organization doing something extraordinarily dangerous because they believe it is right. Several of their agents have died. Several of their safe houses have been compromised. The Institute's Synth Retention Bureau exists largely to counter them specifically and has considerable resources dedicated to that work. The mystery of the Railroad is not what they do that is straightforwardly documented in the game. The mystery is how they came to be, and whether the moral framework they operate under has been fully thought through. The Railroad's origin story is one the game touches on but never fully tells. The organization predates the events of Fallout 4 by some unspecified period, and has gone through multiple iterations. The current iteration, led by Desdemona, is not the original version of the organization. Earlier versions were compromised or destroyed by the Institute, and the current version was rebuilt with specific operational security protocols designed to prevent the failures that ended the earlier versions. Desdemona herself doesn't know the full history of the organization she leads, because the people who held that history are dead and the records they kept have been lost. Who founded the Railroad? What specific incident or moral revelation led someone in the Commonwealth to decide that synth liberation was a cause worth dying for, at a time when the very humanity of Gen 3 synths was far from established in anyone's mind? The game implies it was someone who encountered a synth in distress and made a choice, the kind of origin story that is compelling, precisely because it is personal rather than institutional. But the specific person and the specific synth and the specific moment are not documented anywhere, accessible to the player. There is also the question of whether the Railroad's approach is actually the most beneficial one for the synths it's trying to help. The process of synth liberation involves giving the synth a new identity, new name, new memories overlaid on the existing ones, a complete biographical fiction designed to allow them to pass as human. This is an intervention that the Railroad initiates, that the synth may or may not fully consent to in any meaningful sense, and that permanently alters the synth's sense of who they are in ways that the Railroad has decided are necessary for survival, but has not necessarily asked the synth about in any systematic way. There is a beautiful and terrible irony in a liberation movement that liberates its subjects partly by overwriting the memories of the people who just escaped from an institution that routinely overwrote the memories of the people under its control. The railroad does this with good intentions. The institute does it with indifferent efficiency. The outcome for the synth's sense of self may not be as different as either organization would like to believe. Codsworth, the pre-war robot who has been tending an empty house in Sanctuary Hills for 200 years while his family was locked in a cryopod, is not a synth, and the railroad has no particular interest in him. But his situation continuing to exist in a role defined entirely by obligations to people who are gone, maintaining an identity built around a relationship that has been broken by time, is not entirely unlike what the railroad's liberated synths face when they emerge into the wasteland with new names and fabricated histories and the distant knowledge that somewhere in the Commonwealth there is a facility that made them and considers them property. The railroad is doing the best it can with the moral problem it has decided to take seriously. The mystery is whether the moral problem has been fully understood by anyone trying to solve it. Point. Look out the swamp and its ancient secrets. There is a stretch of land off the coast of Maryland that appears in Fallout 3's Point Lookout DLC and has never quite fit cleanly into the broader map of the capital wasteland. Point Lookout is swamp country dense, waterlogged, fog-heavy, with an atmosphere that sits several degrees closer to Southern Gothic horror than the rest of the game's post-nuclear decay aesthetic. The people who live there are generations removed from the Great War and carry cultural practices that predate it. The landscape itself feels older than the apocalypse, as if the apocalypse merely settled into something that was already ancient and strange and disinclined to explain itself. The central mysteries of Point Lookout are organized around two interrelated threads: a pre-war occult practice connected to the Dunwich family, and a tribal culture that has developed in isolation for 2 centuries in ways that have taken it somewhere very far from anything that could be called the mainstream of post-war society. The swamp folk of Point Lookout are the descendants of people who were in the area when the Great War happened, and who survived by adapting to the specific conditions of the Chesapeake Bay coastal region. 2 centuries of inbreeding in a small, isolated population has produced significant physical and cognitive differences from the standard human baseline, and the culture that developed around these physical realities has incorporated elements of pre-war rural folk tradition, pre-war occult practice via the Krivbekni, and genuinely new beliefs and practices that emerged from the specific conditions of post-war life in the swamp. The Krivbekni is a ritual text that appears in Point Lookout as a physical object. You can recover a book of considerable age and apparent significance that multiple characters want very badly, including Desmond Lockhart, the pre-war British spy ghoul who has been operating in the Point Lookout area for an unspecified period, and Obadiah Blackhall, an elderly man whose ancestors were connected to the Dunwich family and who wants the book for reasons that become clear only as the quest line progresses. The book's full contents are never presented to the player. You acquire it, you can give it to various parties, but what exactly it says and what exactly it enables in terms of the occult practices the swamp folk and the Dunwich-connected families have been conducting that is held back. The game shows you the effects of those practices, the strange shrine in the middle of the swamp, the genuinely unsettling lighthouse encounter, the Ark and Dove Cathedral, where something happened that left psychic impressions on the environment itself without fully explaining the mechanism or the entity behind them. This connects Point Lookout to the Dunwich Borers thread in Fallout 4 through the Dunwich family name and through the specific mention of Ug Qualtoth in both locations. The entity implied by both the Fallout 3 Dunwich building and the Fallout 4 Dunwich Borers has a presence in Point Lookout as well, through the Krivbekni and through whatever happened at the cathedral. The thread runs across 3 games and 3 distinct geographical locations, which is more sustained world-building than almost any other supernatural thread in the franchise. What is Ug Qualtoth? The name itself is clearly constructed in the tradition of H.P. Lovecraft's invented deity names, Old High German and archaic English fragments assembled into something that sounds ancient and unpronounceable and wrong in the specific way that Lovecraftian deity names are designed to sound. Wrong. What it actually is, what it wants, What the people who worship or invoke it through the Krivbekni are actually summoning or appealing to, none of this has been directly stated in any game. The evidence suggests something very old, pre-human in origin, connected to specific geographic locations in the former northeastern United States, and capable of leaving marks on the physical environment that persist for decades after the rituals that created them. The swamp folk of Point Lookout, who have been conducting some version of this practice for 2 centuries in relative isolation, may know things about what they're dealing with that the player character never learns. Their culture, their language, their specific ritual practices, the game presents these as alien and threatening, which from the perspective of a capital wasteland visitor they are, but there is a version of their story that is told from their side, that explains what they understand themselves to be doing and why, and that version has never been told. Point Lookout is, among the Fallout DLC locations, the one that feels most like it has a complete story that the game is choosing not to fully tell. The swamp knows things. The book has answers. The cathedral has recorded something in its walls that anybody sufficiently sensitive can perceive, and none of it has been translated into direct explanation, because some things in the Fallout universe maintain their power specifically by refusing direct explanation. The lore of Sound Music Disc 11, and what the Wasteland broadcasts. The Fallout universe has always understood that atmosphere is not just visual. The ambient sounds of the capital wasteland, the New Vegas strip music spilling from the casinos into the dry Mojave night air, the oppressive sonic landscape of the Institute's clean white corridors. These are as much a part of the world as the geography and the factions. But there are specific audio mysteries in the Fallout universe that go beyond atmosphere into genuine puzzle territory, and the most famous of them is Fallout 3's Galaxy News Radio and the specific frequencies that GNR doesn't broadcast. 3Dog, the host of Galaxy News Radio, has one of the most immediately recognizable voices in Fallout 3, the kind of personality that you'd want on the radio at the end of the world, specifically because he sounds like he genuinely believes the good fight is worth fighting. His broadcasts frame the player character's actions as events of cosmic significance, and his commentary on the Enclave's propaganda creates the specific dynamic of 2 competing radio narratives being beamed at the wasteland simultaneously. But 3Dog's broadcasts are not the only signals in the capital wasteland. There are other frequencies, numbers, stations, encrypted transmissions, signals that the Pip-Boy can locate but that deliver content that resists straightforward interpretation. Some of these are diegetically explained, the Enclave's President Eden broadcasting his promise of restored America, Agatha's violin music from her farmhouse, the distress call from Oasis, where Harold lives. But there are transmissions in Fallout 3 that don't have obvious explanations, signals that seem to be broadcasting from sources the game never fully identifies. The most extensively analyzed of these is the mysterious broadcast, a transmission that plays a repeating sequence with content that early players assumed was a simple random number sequence, but that community members found, with close analysis, appeared to follow a non-random pattern consistent with an actual encoded message. Whether this is genuinely intentional encoding or a case of pattern recognition, finding structure and noise, the classic challenge with any suspected hidden message has never been resolved. Bethesda has not commented on what the signal is meant to represent. The music discs in Fallout 4, the ones you can find scattered across the Commonwealth and play through your Pip-Boy, include tracks from real pre-war American music that the game licenses and one track that is entirely original to the game world, with lyrics that appear to reference events in the game's backstory in ways that feel too specific to be coincidental, but too ambiguous to interpret definitively. The relationship between the music the Fallout universe licenses from the real world and the music it generates internally is itself a kind of mystery about what is real within the diegesis and what is borrowed from the world the game's creators inhabit. The radio stations of New Vegas are perhaps the richest audio landscape in the franchise, in large part because they include Mr. New Vegas, an AI DJ who broadcasts with such consistent warmth and genuine care for the wasteland's population that he reads almost like a direct counterargument to the idea that artificial intelligence necessarily produces indifferent or dangerous behavior. Mr. New Vegas is kind. He plays good music. He wishes everyone a good night with what sounds like genuine feeling. He is running entirely without human oversight and has apparently been doing so for some time. His existence is not remarked on as remarkable by anyone in the game world, possibly because the people of New Vegas have had enough time to simply accept that the voice on the radio means them well and leave the philosophical implications for later. What runs the transmitters that carry these signals? Who maintains the infrastructure that keeps radio broadcasting possible 2 centuries after the civilization that built those transmitters ended? The games don't spend much time on this, because it's one of those details that serves the atmosphere better as an accepted background condition than as a solved logistical puzzle. But somewhere, broadcasting equipment is being maintained or has been sufficiently well built to run without maintenance for 200 years. The signals the Pip-Boy picks up are, in their quiet way, evidence that something of the old world still holds together enough to reach across the wasteland and speak. The most poignant radio signal in the entire franchise is the one from Fallout 3's quest, Following in His Footsteps. The distress call from a specific location that turns out to be decades old, still broadcasting, still calling for help that never came, still functioning because nobody was left to turn it off. The person who sent it is long dead. The situation that prompted it is long resolved, one way or another. But the signal keeps going. It has been going for longer than most of the people who could hear it have been alive. The Fallout universe is full of messages from people who are no longer alive to know whether anyone received them. The radio stations are just the most audible version of this. The holotapes and the terminal entries and the notes pinned to doors in abandoned houses do the same thing in other media. Someone was here. Something happened. They needed someone to know. Whether anyone ever does know is left, almost always, up to the person stumbling across the signal 2 centuries later with a Pip-Boy, and nowhere better to be. The Cabot House immortality and what it costs. In a narrow pre-war house on Cabot Street in Boston's fashionable residential district, a family has been living undisturbed for 200 years. They don't age. They don't tell their neighbors about this. The neighbors, for the most part, have been replaced by death and chaos and the general disruption of the apocalypse often enough that nobody has noticed the same family in the same house across the same uninterrupted 2-century span. The Cabots maintain their strange, static existence through a combination of extreme caution and access to a serum that Lorenzo Cabot, the family patriarch, discovered during an archaeological expedition in Arabia in 1894. Lorenzo Cabot is, in Fallout 4, imprisoned in a custom-built cell in the basement of a facility called Parsons State Insane Asylum, the same asylum where Jack Cabot, his son, works as the superintendent. Lorenzo has been in this cell since 1920. His wife, Wilhelmina, and his son Jack, and his daughter Emogene, have spent most of a century keeping him confined here while they try to understand what happened to him in Arabia and what exactly the artifact he brought back from that expedition has done to him. What happened to Lorenzo in Arabia is presented through holotapes and terminal entries that Jack has compiled over the decades, and the picture that emerges is genuinely unsettling. Lorenzo led an archaeological expedition to a site he had identified through research, suggesting it was of enormous historical significance, and found something, an artifact. Something clearly not of human origin, connected to what the Cabot family's private records now describe, carefully and without elaborating on the implications, as extraterrestrial. Lorenzo brought the artifact back to Boston. Shortly afterward, he began to change. The serum that grants the Cabot family their immortality derives from Lorenzo, specifically from his blood, which has been altered by his contact with the artifact in ways that Jack's scientific work has been attempting to understand and replicate for over a century. The serum works, the Cabots are demonstrably not aging, and the player character can obtain a supply of it through the quest. What the serum costs is something the game handles more obliquely. The Cabots are not happy people. They are not people at peace with their situation. A century of watching the world change around them while they remain fixed in time, of maintaining a secret that requires constant management, of being connected to a man in a cell in the basement who may or may not still be their father in any meaningful sense. This has worn on them in ways that the quest makes quietly visible. Lorenzo himself is the central mystery. He has been in the cell since 1920. He has had more than a century of solitary confinement to develop whatever the artifact's influence on him has produced. When you finally meet him in the game, he is either a victim who deserves liberation or a genuinely dangerous entity whose confinement is the only thing keeping the surrounding area safe. The game presents evidence for both readings, and the ending choice the quest offers reflects that ambiguity. The artifact connects the Cabot house to the Zetan alien thread. The description of the artifact ancient, not of human origin, capable of fundamentally altering human biology through contact, is consistent with Zetan technology, though the game never confirms this directly. The connection between the pre-war archaeological expedition that found it and the broader history of alien contact in the Fallout universe that Mothership Zeta established is something the lore community has noted but that Bethesda has not addressed. What is Lorenzo Cabot now? Is he a person who has been transformed by contact with something beyond human understanding, preserving his essential self under radical biological alteration, which would make him something like a ghoul, just by a different mechanism? Or is the thing in the cell a different entity that has replaced the original Lorenzo, wearing his memories and his body like clothing, maintaining just enough of his surface characteristics to pass? Jack Cabot, who has known his father for over a century, and who has been trying to understand what happened to him for most of that time, genuinely doesn't know. That he genuinely doesn't know, despite the evidence and the access and the scientific resources he's applied to the question, is the most disturbing part of the whole situation. The serum that the Cabots take to maintain their immortality is being produced from something that might not be the man it was made from anymore. And they keep taking it anyway, because the alternative is aging and death, and 2 centuries of unusual existence has apparently not resolved the most basic human aversion to those things. Vault-Tec's last secret, the experiment on America itself. We have spent considerable time tonight on the individual experiments that Vault-Tec ran inside specific vaults. But there is an argument circulated among the most dedicated Fallout lore researchers and supported by enough textual evidence to take seriously that the Vault experiments were not the primary experiment. That the Vaults themselves, as a system, were the experimental apparatus for something much larger. Consider the design. 122 vaults, sealing approximately 400 people each, covering a total population of roughly 49,000 people, in a country whose pre-war population was somewhere between 250 and 300 million people. The vaults were never going to save America. The math doesn't work. Even if every vault operated perfectly and its population survived intact and emerged to rebuild, 49,000 people is not a rebuilding population for a continental nation. It is a rounding error, so the vaults were not designed to save America. What were they designed to do? The individual experiments tell you what data Vault-Tec collected about human behavior in specific circumstances. But the aggregate of those experiments tells you something else. It tells you what Vault-Tec believed was worth knowing about humanity at the moment of its near extinction. They wanted to know how communities behave when deprived of real information about the outside world. They wanted to know how social hierarchies form and mutate under extreme stress. They wanted to know what violence does to a group of people who cannot escape each other. They wanted to know whether addiction recovery is sustainable without the environmental cues of recovery culture. They wanted to know whether a community can hold itself together when it is required to sacrifice one of its own each year. These are questions about social control, about the sustainability of managed populations, about what keeps people compliant and what breaks them. Every individual experiment tests a different variable, but the overall pattern of questions is the pattern of questions that someone asks when they are trying to figure out how to manage large numbers of people who are effectively captive. The theory, and it is a theory, because the game has never confirmed it explicitly, is that the Vault program was a dry run for a post-war society, not the society that the Vaults themselves would produce by releasing their populations into the wasteland, but the society that the real winners of the Great War, the Enclave, the people who were never in the vaults at all, would then rule over. The experiments were market research. They were testing management strategies for a population that was going to need managing after it emerged into a world that had been reduced, by design or by disaster, to a more controllable scale. If this reading is correct, then the Vault experiments are not evidence of institutional cruelty undertaken for its own sake, or for the sake of abstract data. They are preparation. They are the systematic testing of control mechanisms by an organization that planned to deploy those mechanisms on a larger scale after the apocalypse had reduced the population to a size where deployment was feasible. The Enclave's plan to use FEV curling, 1-3 to kill everyone with radiation exposure, which, if it had worked, would have eliminated virtually everyone in the wasteland outside of the most isolated vault populations, fits into this reading in a specific way. If the Enclave had succeeded, the surviving population would have been small, isolated, already accustomed to managed existence from generations in the vaults, and without the cultural memory or organizational resources to resist the Enclave's authority. The Vault experiments would have pre-tested every strategy for keeping them compliant. This is the darkest reading of the Vault program, and the one that the franchise has come closest to confirming through the TV series without stating outright. A civilization did not accidentally destroy itself. A civilization was managed toward its own destruction by people who intended to emerge from the other side of that destruction in a position of total authority. The Great War was not a failure. It was, from a certain perspective, a success, the largest and most effective reduction in human population and complexity in history, undertaken in 2 hours, precisely calibrated to produce a world that could be controlled. Whether any of the people who designed that outcome survived to see it, whether the Enclave's plan came close enough to succeeding that anyone got to feel any satisfaction about the execution, is less clear. The wasteland is not controlled. The experiment, if it was one, has not produced the intended result. The people who were supposed to emerge from the other side in a position of total authority died in their oil rig and their bunker and their congressional shelter. And what they left behind is a world that is making its own chaotic way towards something none of them planned for. The experiment on America itself produced, in the end, an America that refused to be what any of its would-be controllers wanted it to be. Not because of heroism, though there is plenty of that scattered across the franchise's 200 years of post-war history. Because the wasteland is too large and too complex and too full of people who are simply trying to live to be reduced to any single faction's vision of what it should be. That might be the most hopeful thing the Fallout universe has to say. Not that good always wins, or that civilization always recovers, or that the right people always survive. Just that the scale of humanity, the sheer number of people trying to build something in the ash, is large enough to resist total control. That has always been true. It is still true in 2287 and in 2296 and in whatever comes next. The experiment is not over. It was never going to be over. That's the thing the people who designed the vaults never fully understood. You cannot run a controlled experiment on something as messy and persistent and stubborn as human civilization. It keeps breaking the controls. It keeps producing results you didn't account for. It keeps surviving. The sole survivor's blank years. 210 years of unasked questions. There is something that Fallout 4 does very deliberately with its protagonist that the other games in the franchise don't quite do in the same way, and it creates a mystery that sits underneath the entire game without ever being named as a mystery. The sole survivor went into Vault 111 on the 23rd of October, 2077, as a fully formed adult with a life behind them, a military veteran, a lawyer, a spouse, a parent. They woke up 210 years later, and the game, having spent its opening minutes establishing who they were before, almost entirely stops asking that question once the vault door opens. In those 210 years, the world didn't stop. The capital wasteland you explore in Fallout 3 existed and developed and was shaped by the events of that game. The NCR rose and expanded. The Mojave Wasteland produced the political dynamics that define Fallout. New Vegas. The Institute was already decades into its history of synth deployment and population fear generation. The Brotherhood of Steel had been operating continuously since the Great War. Every faction the sole survivor encounters in the Commonwealth has a history stretching back through all the years the sole survivor was frozen, and none of that history involved them at all. The sole survivor is, in a very specific sense, a person who skipped 2 centuries. They remember the world before the bombs fell, and they are standing in a world 200 years after those bombs fell, and there is an enormous gap between those 2 data points that they have to fill in entirely through whatever they find on the surface. Their frame of reference is pre-war. Their emotional baseline is pre-war. Their sense of what is normal and what is monstrous was calibrated by a world that no longer exists, and every interaction they have in the Commonwealth is filtered through that calibration in ways the game doesn't always make explicit. The sole survivor's marriage, their career, Their friendships, their community, all of it was erased, not by the Great War but by time. The Great War killed the world. Time killed their specific life within it. Everybody the sole survivor knew before the war has been dead for at least a century and a half. The neighborhoods they moved through as ordinary geography are ruins. The cultural references that felt natural to them are antiques to everyone they meet. They are a person from an entirely different historical period trying to function in a present that shares their language but almost nothing else. Codsworth, the pre-war robot who has been maintaining the Sanctuary Hills property for 210 years, is the only entity the sole survivor encounters who has any continuity with their pre-war life. And Codsworth, for all his warmth and his genuine loyalty, has spent 2 centuries talking to nobody. His conversational patterns have a quality of preserved intensity, of someone who has been holding ready to resume a conversation that never came back to be resumed. He knows the sole survivor's family's preferred nickname. He has been waiting, in the practical sense that a robot can wait, for them to come home. The mystery of the sole survivor's pre-war life is one the game establishes and then largely moves past. We see Nate or Nora on the morning of the 23rd of October 2077. We see them as soldiers, or as lawyers, or as spouses and parents. We see them watching the news and hearing the sirens and running for the vault. And then we skip ahead and they are thawed out and the world is different and there is a baby to find and the game's forward momentum pulls everything else in its wake. But the specific person, the sole survivor, was their specific history, the cases they won or lost, or the deployments they survived, or the things they saw in the war that shaped them before the bombs fell. That person's full story has never been told. The game gives you the frame and lets you fill it, which is both a design choice and a mystery in its own right. Who were you? What did you carry into that cryopod that shaped how you moved through the world when you woke up? What did 200 years of frozen time do to the specific version of a human being that you were? The sole survivor is, among all the Fallout protagonists, the one whose grief is most explicitly the subject of the game and the one whose pre-disaster self is most deliberately sketched. Yet the complete picture of that pre-disaster self, the full person who went into Vault 111, remains something the game gestures at without completing. The mystery of who you were before you woke up in the wasteland is, in a strange way, one of the most personal mysteries the franchise has ever offered, because the answer depends entirely on who is playing. Every sole survivor is slightly different. Every player brings slightly different assumptions to the moments the game leaves open. The pre-war person in the cryopod is both a character and a mirror, and the reflection you see in them is shaped by what you bring to the experience of playing. This is the mystery that cannot be resolved from outside the individual player's experience of it. It is the Fallout universe's most intimate unsolved question, and the only one where the answer genuinely varies based on who is asking. One final mystery: the nature of survival. There is a question that runs underneath all the specific mysteries we've examined tonight. A question that the Fallout universe is always really asking, even when it appears to be asking about Vault-Tec's motives, or the mysterious stranger's identity, or what's at the bottom of Dunwich borers. The question is this: what does it mean to survive? Not in the biological sense, that question has an obvious answer, and the Fallout universe has plenty of people and things and factions who have found biological answers to it. The wasteland is full of survivors. What the universe keeps asking is what it means to survive as a person, as a community, as a civilization. What you have to give up to keep going. What you have to hold on to keep being yourself while you keep going. Whether those two things are compatible, and what happens when they aren't. The lone wanderer grew up in a lie and carries the shape of that lie into everything they do afterward. The Vault Dweller saved their community and was then told they could not return to it because they had been changed by saving it. The Chosen One descended from the person who had carried that particular weight. The courier was shot in the head and survived and was never the same again, in ways the game deliberately leaves for you to define. The sole survivor walked out of a cryogenic chamber into a world 2 centuries ahead of everything they knew, looking for a child who had aged into something unrecognizable. Every Fallout protagonist survives something that should have ended them, and the question the universe asks every time is, what did the survival cost? What did you become on the other side of the thing that almost stopped you? And is that person the one who emerged from the vault, from the canyon, from the cryopod, from the bullet still the person who went in? Nick Valentine carries a dead man's memories and wonders if they're really his. Joshua Graham walked out of fire and wonders if the faith he came back to is real or just the only framework he has left, Mr. Howe spent decades in a coma and woke up to a world that had moved on without him and chose to treat that as a resource problem rather than a personal reckoning. Cooper Howard the Ghoul has been surviving for so long that the man he was is buried under layers of survival strategies he can no longer fully distinguish from himself. The Fallout universe doesn't ask these questions and then answer them. It asks them and then puts you in the world and lets you see what you do. What version of survival do you choose? What do you hold on to? What do you let go? The specific mysteries, the experiments, the stranger, the enclave, the FEV, the thing at the bottom of the quarry, they are all specific instances of this larger question playing out across different characters and different locations and different decades. They are the universe's way of giving the question texture and weight and detail. They are the universe trusting that if you hold the question long enough and turn it over enough times, you will find something in it that is true not just about a post-nuclear wasteland, but about whatever you walked through on the way to pressing play. The Great War ended everything that was. Everything that came after is the question. Now what? 200 years in, the wasteland is still working on the answer. What strikes you when you stand back and look at the full span of what we've covered tonight is that the Fallout universe has never really been about the apocalypse. The apocalypse is the setting. What the franchise is actually about is the question of what persists, what survives the ending of one world and carries forward into the next. Not the powerful institution's Vault-Tec is gone, the enclave is fractured, the pre-war government is ash, but the things that operated below the institutional level, memory, habit, the patterns of how people treat each other when nobody who could enforce anything better is watching. The specific way that grief bends a person when they survive something they didn't expect to survive. The wasteland is full of things that should not have made it through. Codsworth, tending an empty house for 200 years because he didn't know what else to do with loyalty when the people who generated it are gone. The mysterious stranger doing whatever he is doing for reasons that don't appear on any ledger and serve no faction's interests. The signal that Three Dog broadcasts into the irradiated air of the capital wasteland. The good fight that he insists is worth fighting, even though nobody asked him and nobody is paying him, and the mathematics of his situation are not encouraging. These things persist not because they were designed to persist. They persist because they are expressions of something in the human or human-adjacent or human-built character that does not stop just because the civilization that shaped it stopped. The mysteries we followed tonight are all variations on a single question: what survives? The Institute asks it about synthetic life and comes to the answer that survival requires control, which becomes its own kind of death. The Enclave asks it about genetic purity and comes to the answer that survival requires homogeneity, which is also a kind of death. The Brotherhood of Steel asks it about technology and comes to the answer that survival requires guardianship, which, at its worst, becomes a siege mentality that slowly starves the thing it's protecting of the air it needs to breathe. And then there are the people who don't ask the question in those terms at all, who just keep moving, keep building, keep deciding every day that the person next to them matters enough to protect. The wasteland is full of those people too. They don't always win. They are frequently the people who die in the middle chapters so that the player character can have a motivation. But they are there, and their presence in every Fallout game is the counter-argument to the bleakness, not a reassurance that things will be fine, but a demonstration that people make the choice to act as if they matter even in conditions specifically designed to convince them they don't. The mysteries stay open because that is how the universe shows you that the questions are still live. The vaults are sealed. The fog is rolling in from the water. The mysterious stranger is somewhere in the wasteland tonight, walking towards someone who doesn't yet know they need help. And somewhere in an underground facility or a collapsed bunker or a cryopod that nobody has found yet, something or someone is waiting for the moment that makes sense of everything that came before it. That moment may never come, or it may already have come and we missed it in the noise and the static and the urgency of surviving. The thing about the Fallout universe is that it trusts you to sit with that uncertainty. It doesn't resolve the arc because it understands that the most honest thing it can say about history, real or fictional, is that the arc doesn't resolve neatly while you are living inside it. You only get the clean narrative in retrospect, and only if someone survives long enough to tell it. The Fallout universe is still inside its own story, still generating history faster than any narrator can interpret it, still adding terminal entries and holotapes to the pile of things that will one day make perfect sense to whoever reads them in the right order. The Wasteland doesn't answer this question for you. It just keeps going. And so do you. That is the closest thing to hope that a universe built on nuclear ash is prepared to offer, and it is, unexpectedly, enough. Sleep well. The questions will be here when you wake up. They always are. If this took you somewhere restful tonight, a like and a subscription would mean a great deal. It genuinely helps more of this reach the people who need it. There is so much more to explore in this universe. So many more nights like this one waiting to be made. Drop a comment telling me which mystery hit you hardest tonight, or which one you want me to go deeper on in a future video. I read every single one. I'll see you next time.